Hi there. I'm sure you're wondering why these things even exist, huh? Well, they do, and I'm quite eager to show you what these are. These are the Shadow Warrior novelizations by two different authors. One is called For Dead Eyes Only, and the other is called You Only Die Twice. And as you can expect, they are, well, the titles are parodies of James Bond movies, but the actual contents of the novels themselves are to be determined. I have not read these, so we are going to have an experience together with them. You and me, chat, and Lo Wang. In fact, let's get the window up. Should be nice like that, and let's bring Lo Wang along with us too. Brilliant, brilliant. So, without further ado, we'll be reading the first novel, For Dead Eyes Only, by Dean Wesley Smith. I wonder if anyone is familiar with that name or not. I'm not too familiar with it myself, but it'll be interesting. Let's get a little bit of background music to help us get into the atmosphere, I suppose. Have to make it a little bit quiet though. Move over, Destroyer. Make way for the Shadow Warrior. Based on the CD-ROM game from 3D Realms. For Dead Eyes Only by Dean Wesley Smith. This is the first novel. We'll be reading the second one later. But let's go. Shadow Warrior for Dead Eyes Only by Dean Wesley Smith. Pocketbooks. A retro reading time release. And the website's there. Acknowledgements. George Broussard and Scott Miller, head dudes at 3D Realms, would like to thank the following people who helped bring Lo Wang to life in the PC game Shadow Warrior. Jim Norwood and Frank Madden, who worked on the game for 2 years straight, sacrificing anything resembling a social life. Cheryl Norwood and Lucinda Madden, wives who sacrificed too. Kevin Schuller and Stephen Cole, two level designers par excellence, who make the worlds we play in. Stephen Hornback, the workhorse of the art team, and Michael Whalen, who designed how Lo Wang appears. Lee Jackson, our sound artist and musician, and finally, John Galt, who gave his voice to Lo Wang. Ha ha ha, that's me. We'd also like to thank Murray Franklin, or Murray Broitkin, Rick Ramo, Tony Key, Harry Rubb, nice name, and Ron Haimovitz, all from GT Interactive, for making this deal happen, and for all the friendship along the way. And, note how Randy isn't in the credits here. Anyways, for Chris, thanks for all the fun. Pocketbooks, so the vision of Simon & Schuster, very interesting. And the copyright. And here we go. Let's take a sip of our sippy juice, and we'll read chapter 1. Okay. Chapter 1. Excerpt from The Day the Continents Moved by Dr. K.D. Morgan. On the beaches of Southern California, the surfing population discovered an entirely new and very dangerous sport, continental wake surfing. With the American continent moving at such a high rate of speed toward Europe, 40 to 50 foot waves formed behind the continents like a wake behind a boat. One surfer nicknamed Tube stayed on the same wave for 12 hours and 6 minutes before falling and never being seen again. Many consider his ride a world's record that will stand until next time America heads towards Europe. There are continental wake surfers in Australia who claim they rode even longer. It will be up to a national panel to decide if Tube really holds the record or not. Yes, we will watch Wang, wash Wang, Anarchy. Thank you for the 1,000 Hungarian florins, I think. But that's enough for the excerpt. Let's go. Bullets pounded into the heavy, polished wood of the sushi bar with distinct individual smacks, one right after another, as if someone were cutting fish into small chunks. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the smell of raw fish and cooked tempura. Not a normal smell, and Lo Wang took a deep, long breath. He loved sushi and high-velocity weapons. Mixing the two until this afternoon would have never crossed his mind. Smack, smack, smack. Bullets tore into the wood. Gray smoke floated in clouds near the ceiling, mixed by the slow-moving fan. In one corner, a woman sobbed. Beside him, behind the sushi bar, two businessmen in gray suits crouched, wide-eyed, obviously terrified. Sweat from the warm day and their terror dripped from their faces as if they had both just run blocks to catch a bus. Wang laughed. Ha ha ha! Today, they would have a story to tell their office co-workers and their grandchildren, the great sushi bar shootout. He could just imagine how the one who cowered the most, whose pants dripped wet with fear, would tell the story with him as the hero. Ancient Japanese saying, "Largest coward, biggest story." Wang's stomach growled between the sound of the rounds of bullets pounding into the face of the bar, where he'd been just sitting just moments before. The only part of lunch he had received was the soup. Good soup, he would admit, but not enough to fill his hunger before he was so rudely interrupted by the dogs who call themselves men, shooting up the fine Japanese restaurant. His stomach rumbled again. Soup alone just wasn't going to hold him for long. Smack, 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 brrrr. Oh, I gotta scroll down a little bit. He glanced around the area to see if he could locate anything to snack on to calm the annoying growling of his insides. A dirt-covered piece of salmon lay on the floor. Nothing else was in sight behind the counter. Normally, he wouldn't have minded a little dirt on his raw fish, but salmon always gave him intense gas. And intense gas caused his housekeeper, Mrs. Minsky, unnecessary stress in opening the windows of his apartment. She had been complaining enough lately about always having to wash out the blood splattered on his clothes. Eating salmon wouldn't help her mood. Again, his stomach rumbled. Ancient Japanese saying, "No food in sight? Move sight." He moved in front of the cowering businessmen and crouched so he could get a look around the end of the sushi bar. He hadn't paid any attention at all to who had started the shooting. He had simply jumped over the bar, finishing his soup as he went. He expected to see a bunch of gang kids from the New York streets. This neighborhood had been riddled with gang problems lately. He normally would have known better than to stop here. He could have just gone the extra few blocks into New York's Chinatown. There, for certain, he would have been able to finish his lunch without the sound of gunfire and the smell of gunpowder changing the taste of the sushi. He glanced around the end of the bar and his blood ran cold, as if the thick heat of the summer afternoon had been swept away by an arctic wind. 2 of the 7 men facing him with guns wore the black and green headband he'd become so familiar with. These were no regular street gang kids tearing up a restaurant for personal gain or plain enjoyment. No, these were Zilla's men. All 7 of them. Zilla's men were highly trained, armed to the teeth assassins, and for years now their only mission had been to kill him. Zilla had double-crossed Lo Wang before when Wang worked for Zilla's company as a shadow warrior in Japan. Wang had almost been killed, but had managed to get to the United States and recover. Once healed, Wang had sworn revenge. Now Zilla had made a mistake. He sent assassins to kill Wang again. In America, assassins who might know Zilla's location. And on top of that, they had disturbed his lunch. Wang could have killed them all easily, but revenge is a dish best served raw. And in the sushi restaurant, that seemed appropriate. He moved back to where the chef had knocked over a rack full of large knives when he scrambled for the back room. 3 knives still had small bits of fish clinging to their edges. He picked the pieces off and popped them into his mouth, letting their wonderful taste melt off the edge of his hunger. More bullets pounded into the bar. Smack, 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 brrrr. He studied the knives. It would be a waste to use such fine instruments on such meat as these assassins. He did have 3 guns on him, but in a Japanese restaurant, knives just felt right to him. Granted, that would be a slight nod back to his earlier, more traditional days as a ninja, a shadow warrior in Japan. His old teacher, Master Shoji, would be proud. Master Shoji had told him that feeling right about killing a man was more important than just killing him. Except, of course, if the man was about to kill you, then feelings no longer mattered. Master Shoji always had a lot... Master Shoji always had a lot of exceptions to his rules. Yes, that does make sense. In English, by the way. Wang patted the guns, tucked in his belt, and slung over his back, enjoying their hard feel. Not that a good missile launcher didn't suit him just fine, like a baby in a mother's hands, but at this moment, knives would be his choice. He had decided it had been a few days since he killed someone with a knife. Falling out of practice was never a wise idea in his line of work. Smack, smack, smack. Wang ignored the bullets tearing up the bar at his back. Carefully, he held each knife with one finger, making note of its weight and bounce position. Soon he had a dozen knives held lightly in his fingers. Another round of machine gun fire pounded into the bar and cut apart the hanging cloth above the cutting table, dropping dust and cloth down to the already soiled hunk of salmon. One of the businessmen started to move, but Wang snapped him back into his crouched position with a simple tap on the soldier. With a finger wagging at the man, he said, "No, no, no." It was as if he were scolding a misbehaving child. There was no point in letting the businessman be killed. He would someday have grandchildren who needed a story and a hero, and the businessman needed to be alive to tell the story of the great Japanese restaurant shootout. Wang stood and turned to face the gunman. He had knives in both hands. Who wants some Wang? Faster than the human eye could follow, Wang threw one knife at a time at the startled men with guns. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Each knife struck a target exactly where he had aimed. Thunk, thunk, thunk. 6 assassins jerked backwards. Expressions of surprise covered their faces. Each had a knife buried to the hilt in his throat. Lo Wang knew a man who thinks he is invincible is always surprised when he is killed. Those 6 men looked very, very surprised. With only one assassin left, Wang took 2 knives and with a flick flick pinned both the man's arms tightly to the wall behind him. Thunk thunk. The man's AK-47 had dropped to the floor. Wang's throws had exactly cut the muscles in both arms, leaving the man helpless and pinned like a butterfly in a child's science project. With an easy bound, Wang jumped back over the now ruined sushi bar and his empty soup bowl and walked casually up to the assassin, spinning 2 knives in one hand as a cheerleader would spin a baton. The assassin appeared to be the same type Zilla had sent to kill Wang numbers of times before in Japan. Young, not more than 20, with cold, beady eyes and hair cut so close it all stood up straight like some stiff brush. To Wang, sending such youth always seemed to be such a waste. It would have just been easier for Zilla to kill them himself. It did give Wang practice, but practicing mid-lunch was not his idea of optimum time. The assassin's gaze was focused completely on the knife spinning in Wang's right hand. He seemed to ignore the blood flowing down from his arms down the wall. Wang never ignored bleeding, especially if he were the one doing the bleeding, but it seemed Zilla had trained his men otherwise. Not a healthy training in Wang's opinion. With the knife spinning in a blur in front of the man's face, Wang said,
"I hope you are paying attention."
The man nodded too quickly.
"Zilla, his location, please?"
The gunman's expression changed from one of wanting to please to blank. He shook his head slowly side to side. His eyes were filled with fear, but his lips were glued together by courage. A very deadly and stupid combination. Wang, without seeming to slow the spinning knives, snipped off a small piece of the assassin's nose and caught it in his left hand, holding it up for the assassin to see. Ouch.
"Looks like chicken,"
Lo Wang said, turning the hunk of nose around in front of the man.
"Chicken, a favorite of mine."
Wang smiled, spun the hunk of nose slowly in his fingers, licking his lips, and then tossed the nose over his shoulder so that it landed near the businessmen behind the bar. They could keep it as a souvenir of their lunch, maybe even different in plastic, mounted on a nice plaque, and hang it over the fireplace. Then when telling the story to their grandchildren, they could point to the hunk of nose with pride. The assassin's eyes were almost bulging out of his head. Blood poured from his nose and down the front of his face, spurting slightly at the beat of his heart. Oops. Wang moved the still spinning knives closer to the assassin's face, and then began to lower them slowly.
"Zilla?"
Wang said, staring into the assassin's eyes while smiling and lowering the spinning knives towards the man's belt.
"Or do I find a piece that looked like pork?"
Somehow the assassin's eyes got even bigger. Then through the blood he sputtered, "I don't know where Zilla is, but Tanaka does." Wang backed the spinning knives away slightly, and the man sighed, which came out almost like a gargle because of all the blood.
"Tanaka?"
Wang asked.
"He have another name?"
The problem with the name Tanaka was that it was so common in Japan, much like Smith or Jones in the United States. Without another name, the information would be almost useless. The assassin shook his head, spraying blood in all directions. "Only Tanaka." Wang nodded, discouraged. He could tell the instant a man began to speak the truth. This man was doing so, of that there was no doubt. But at least Wang now had one lead to Zilla's location. Now all he had to learn was a first name. Wang turned and started away. "I will let you live," he said, loud enough for the assassin to hear. Then, without turning around, Wang flicked both knives underhand and backward at the assassin. Doop, doop. The knives cut off both ears of the assassin and pinned the man's head between the knives. Wang laughed to himself. "Oh, hello. Excuse me. I got a phone call." Pardon me. Alright, now where was I? Right, the knives cut off both ears of the assassin and pinned the man's head between the knives. Wang laughed to himself.
"Assuming someone can stop bleeding." Ha ha ha.
Wang knew that would not be possible, but the assassin deserved a slow, lingering death. He had broken down and given away his boss, There is no honor in such cowardly action. Better to die with lips sealed than live with hole in honor. Wang moved back to the sushi bar and leaned over to look at the two businessmen who stared at the nose on the floor in front of them.
You can finish lunch now,
Wang said. Speak well of me to grandchildren. The businessmen both nodded, but didn't stand. Wang turned and headed for the front door and the busy New York City streets. This time, he would go the extra 2 blocks to Chinatown before stopping for lunch. And meat first, no soup, just in case he was interrupted by another group who wanted a piece of Wang. And that's chapter 1. So tell me, chat, what did you think about chapter 1? We are 6% through the book, apparently. Only, lots of other chapters to go. Surely. What did, what did Lo Wang in the corner think? I'm not sure. Zilla called. He wanted his Wang back. That's true. I'm not sure I want this Wang. Unique. Enjoyable. Did not disappoint. It was inspiring, pretty epic. Don't know what to think because you only just joined. Well, you're in for more of a treat because we're going to read another excerpt from The Day the Continents Moved by Dr. K.D. Morgan. All governments did their best to deal with the sudden movement of the continents, but the modern worldwide communication systems rendered most governments useless. After the first few hours, most government workers just went home to their families to watch the end of the world on television. As it turned out, the anchors on CNN became the de facto leaders of the world during the crisis. I see. Deep underground, somewhere in Colorado, Dr. K.D. Morgan brushed a strand of gray hair out of her eyes and tried to focus. She was a big woman, solid and fit. Her figure filled out her white lab coat enough that even a few of the 20-year-old scientists around the project had noticed her. Normally, she liked being noticed. She liked her men young and big. In fact, she liked everything big. But lately, she hadn't even returned the young men's smiles, let alone thought about meeting one of them for a drink and late-night exercise. Too many hours, too many days of constant work. Big, important work. With her invention, the ABCD device, she could almost entirely stop earthquakes in California, and for that matter, anywhere in the world. Thousands, no, not just thousands, millions of lives would be saved with her invention. Once it was completely tested and put in place around the world. And soon the lab tests would be finished and she could take a break before starting the larger field test. A deserved break, maybe to Hawaii. She let herself smile at the thought of big, tan, young men walking the beach, humps and bumps covered only by thin cloth. She could almost feel a young man's strong hands rubbing lotion on her back. Up, down, up, down. She'd unhook her top and let him slide his hands along her spine, working the slick lotion into her skin. Then she rolled over and... boom, a loud bang behind and slightly above her snapped her back from her soon-to-be vacation. Thank God. Annoyed at the interruption right when she was getting to the good part of the daydream, she turned, prepared to be angry at some careless scientist. Instead, she was shocked at what she saw. Oddly shaped hooded men with guns. Big, oddly shaped hooded men with big guns. There was something very wrong looking about them. They had humps under their robes where humps didn't belong, and bumps where bumps didn't belong. On big men, she knew exactly where every hump and bump belonged. These humps and bumps were all wrong. We're reading Seuss now, boys. Also, some of the hoods didn't fit just right on the big men's heads. But she didn't have any time to study their bumps and humps any longer because the weird-looking men suddenly opened fire at the government guards. Dr. Morgan was so shocked, she didn't even think to duck as the roar of their weaponry overwhelmed the huge room. She just stood there, open-mouthed, watching what was happening in her quiet underground lab. Instantly, the normal, moldy smell of the cavern was replaced by the smell of burnt gunpowder. Alarms filled the air with a shrill whine, and the ventilation fans sucked at the gray smoke like a chain smoker with her first sput of the day. The main section of the lab was a hollowed-out cave with almost 600 feet underground. The cave had been drilled into solid stone back in the old Cold War days of fear, bombs, and Richard Nixon. Okay. When her project was funded by Congress, the old cave turned out to be the perfect spot to do the experiments. Cheap, below ground, and very secret, very easy to guard. Well, theoretically easy to guard. But from the looks of the big hooded men pouring into the room from the entrance balcony, not easy enough, not by a long shot. 3 government guards along the top balcony were crouched behind desks, valiantly firing their rifles at the attacking hooded men, trying to hold them off. And the hooded men were firing back with machine guns of some sort. The cave sounded like the inside of a subwoofer, almost vibrating with a deep rumble. A ricocheting bullet smacked into the scope she had been staring into a few minutes before, shattering as if some kind of giant had stepped on it. "Shit," she said, but her words were swallowed by the intense noise. Suddenly, she realized what the hooded men were after. Her invention. They wanted the ABCD device. A MacGuffin. Well, they wouldn't get it if she had anything to say about it, and at the moment, she did. She turned quickly towards the phone booth-sized box in the center of the room. If she could reach the box and disable it before she was captured, she would be safe, and so too the entire world. Her invention was far, far too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. And men with bad-fitting hoods and wrong-looking bumps firing big guns were clearly the wrong hands. 5 or 6 bullets cut a sharp path into the floor in front of her, forcing her to come to a quick halt 6 paces from her invention, balanced there as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff. 3 men in hoods stood to her right, 2 pointed guns at her. The other one only stared at her chest. Normally she would have been flattered, but not now. "Dr. Morgan, I presume?" the chest starer asked, finally looking up at her face. She said nothing as she stared at the bright yellow eyes visible behind the holes in the hood. Snake-like eyes. Insane eyes. Frozen in position, Dr. Morgan watched as the leader of the small band raised an orange can and pointed the top at her. A large word was printed on the side of the can, and she could clearly read it, even though it made no sense. Toast. What could be in a can labeled toast? The man pushed down on the top of the can and hit her squarely in the mug with a stream of hot liquid. On the beach in Hawaii, she wouldn't have minded some hot liquid in the face, but not now. Goodness. Instantly, out of reflex, she closed her eyes. She gagged, then coughed, then did her best to fight off the blackness as a dark cloud swallowed her, as if though someone had pulled a blanket over her head. She didn't remember slumping to the hard floor, or the fact that on the way down she finally understood the word on the can. Indeed. The gigantic office on the top of the Los Angeles skyscraper smelled of jasmine. It was lit to the level of a dark movie theater. Jefferson Adams entered and stopped, getting his bearings while letting his eyes adjust. An unlit fireplace was to his right, surrounded by dark leather couches and chairs, all unoccupied. A well-stocked bar was to his left. Directly in front of him was a huge desk. A man sat in the chair behind it and pushed away from his desk so that he remained in dark shadow near the back wall. Jefferson Adams moved silently toward the desk and the man in shadow. He knew he was being studied and didn't mind. He was just a normal, plain-looking man in a normal, plain-looking suit. Any man on the street. His name was as funny as his face. For each mission, he had picked a name from the names of presidents. Kind of a little game he played with himself. This mission, it was Jefferson Adams. Last week, he'd been Clinton Johnson. The month before, Franklin Hoover. No one in the spy community knew his real name, or even what his real face had once looked like. He was a master of disguise and could blend into a crowd almost as well as an invisible man could walk into a women's locker room. And like the Invisible Man, it was something he just loved to do. "That's close enough, Mr. Adams," the figure in the shrouded in shadows said. Adams stopped, now only a few feet in front of the wooden desk. A small bronze statue sat on the corner of the empty expanse of polished surface. The statue was of a man sitting naked on a small mound of rocks. The man's face was turned skyward in agony. Carved into the base of the statue were the words, "One tough shit." Indeed. Adams glanced at the statue, then back at the man sitting behind the desk in shadow. The man's hands were steepled in front of his chest. There was no way for Adams to see his face, but he didn't need to. He knew this was the man he worked for. There was nothing else he needed to know. A man's desire to keep his face and identity hidden in the world of international spies was something Adams clearly respected, or certainly respected. "Your assignment, Mr. Adams, if you care to accept it, is to contact Lo Wang for a job. A very important job that must be done quickly." Adams shook his head. "Wouldn't it be simpler for me to just do the job myself?" The man in the shadow laughed, and it came out like the sound of a barking dog. Almost exactly like the one next door in Brooklyn where Adams had grown up. One night, while in high school, Adams had grown tired of the dog's constant barking, and had tossed the dog a hunk of poisoned meat over the back fence. The dog had died, and the next week the neighbors replaced it with another dog who barked more. Adams had taken that as a personal lesson. Never treat a symptom without determining its cause. 2 months later, the neighbors had moved away due to the unsafe conditions of their home. It seems like it routinely sprang gas leaks, smelled of spilled sewage, or sewage spillage, and had regular small electrical fires. The new neighbors had no dog. The man in the shadow slowly stopped his barking laugh. "I'm afraid," the man said, "that this job requires special abilities that not even you possess, Mr. Adams." Adams didn't bother to feel insulted. There was no point. This man was the boss, and he paid the bills. Arguing with him would only slow down or possibly even end the payments. That was a lesson many employees in America needed to learn as far as Adams was concerned. People had forgotten what being a boss really meant. Now, in many instances, the employees ran the offices and the workplaces simply by making the boss afraid to act. And such fear only led to failure. "Okay," Adams said. "I'll contact this Lo Wang person. What do I tell him?" "Someone has stolen a very valuable and very dangerous invention called the ABCD device from a government lab in Colorado." "What's so funny, Mr. Adams?" Adams laughed. "What's so funny, Mr. Adams?" Adams shook his head. "So I'm working for the government this time around, eh?" The man in shadow snorted. "You work for me, Mr. Adams, and I would suggest you not forget that fact." Adams bowed seriously toward the man behind the desk. "I would never forget such an important detail." "See that you don't," the man said. He opened a drawer in the desk, took out a small envelope, and slid it towards Adams, all without showing his face. Adams was impressed. "All the details you need to tell Wang are in the envelope." "So I find this Lo Wang and tell him about the theft," Adams said. and then he just jumps into action. Again, the man in shadow laughed, the barking sound going on far longer than Adams liked. But when a boss has a nasty habit, sometimes it's more economically smart to look in the other direction. In this case, Adams stood his position and waited for the barking to end. "Ha ha ha, my dear Mr. Adams," the man in shadow said. "Lo Wang would as soon kill you as go after the stolen government property. However, he has one weakness." Adams didn't much like the thought that he was that easy to kill, but he said nothing in his own defense. "And what would that weakness be?" "Revenge," the man in shadow said. "Lo Wang wants a revenge on a man named Zilla, and he thinks a man named Tanaka knows the location of Zilla." "So?" Adams said, shrugging. He had no idea who either man was, and didn't much care. "Lo Wang doesn't know Tanaka's first name. He will work for you, with that as the only reward for his efforts." Adams shook his head and laughed. The man worked for cheap for someone who is so good. "Revenge is never cheap, Mr. Adams," the man in shadow said, his voice low and very serious. "It is a lesson I would suggest you take to heart." "I might just do that," Adams said. "See that you do," the man said. Adams shrugged. "So do you know where I might find this Lo Wang person?" Again, the man in the shadow laughed, his barking grating on Adams' nerves like a screaming baby in a crowded restaurant. A minute later, Adams had the rest of the information he needed, plus the address of Lo Wang's apartment in New York City. Lo Wang sat silently in the center of the living room of his... Lo Wang sat silently in the center of the living room floor of his apartment, the window open, sun pouring in over him. Palms upward, he was pulling the energy of the day through his palms and into his body, storing it for later use. Master Shoji, his teacher, had taught him the practice. Learned, he said, from a cat named Spike. Master Shoji had also taught Wang to bathe himself with his tongue, a skill Wang made very little use of, preferring the gentle movement of a shower head. Women, however, seemed to enjoy the tongue bath aspect of his training, and he honestly enjoyed bathing them. Oh yeah, this one's a little loud, isn't it? "You gotta stop loafing and give me a hand?" The voice of his housekeeper, Mrs. Minsky, filled the air like a fire alarm. She had been after him for weeks to move the couch and chairs so that she could clean behind them. And just to stop her constant complaining about the amount of dirt he let grow under the couch, he said he would help her this week. This week had arrived, it seemed. At this very moment. Master Shoji had always said that a task left undone would be a task required at the worst possible time. Mrs. Minsky had decided that during the only half hour the sun had broken through the clouds in 2 weeks was the best time to do the cleaning, and the worst time for Wang. But a promise given was a sacred thing to Wang, even if the promise was only moving furniture.
"Wang Hope,"
he said, letting the power of the sun float him to his feet. Mrs. Minsky had been Wang's housekeeper since he had moved into this apartment in New York. She actually lived 2 floors below and worked for 2 other tenants in the building. It helped her pay her rent since her husband had been killed by an Arab car driver. He had gotten into the cab carrying a copy of the Satanic Verses. Controversy. Mrs. Minsky said her husband had been set up since he hadn't read anything except the sports page for 20 years. She had never told Wang who might have wanted her husband killed. Wang moved over beside her near the couch and stuck out his finger.
"Poor finger."
Mrs. Minsky stared at him, then shook her head in disgust. "Just move the damn couch. I already know that you've been eating salmon again." As Wang moved the couch into the center of the room, a man rapped on the door. At once, Wang knew it was a man because the sound of knuckles the sound of the knuckles on the wood. Wang also knew that the man stood 6 feet tall because of the height of the knock, and that the man had very little fear because of the forcefulness of the sound. Wang also knew that the man was an American, most likely wearing a business suit because of the faint aroma of Old Spice aftershave. Only American businessmen wore that shit.
A fine time
For company, Miss Minsky said. Well, you're just going to have to talk to your company in the hallway until I get this cleaned.
That will not be problem,
Wang said, moving out of his housekeeper's way and opening the door. The man who stood there wore a cheap brown suit and had a face that looked exactly like thousands of other faces. Wang instantly figured that the man worked for the government. Government work did that to a face. The man smiled and stuck out his hand. I'm Mr. Adams. You Wang? Wang ignored the extended hand, wondering if he should just kill the guy and get it over with. But if he got blood on the carpet, Mrs. Minsky would certainly never let him hear the end of it. She complained enough about the blood on his clothes.
I am Lo Wang,
Wang said, stepping past the man and into the hallway while pushing the door closed behind him. The hallway outside his apartment looked like most hallways in New York City. Warm wood, linoleum floor, walls that needed painting, and a fire extinguisher near the window by the fire escape. There were no other men in the hallway or hiding on the fire escape, so Wang turned to face Adams directly. Adams smiled at him. Wang did not smile back, only stood, waiting. Ancient Japanese saying,
man who say nothing, make other man speak.
Finally, Adams stopped smiling and said, Look, Wang, I'll get right to the point. Wang said nothing, but simply continued to stare at Adams. The man had little beady brown eyes that matched his cheap brown suit. Wang was convinced his name was not Adams. He did not look or act like an Adams, and his partially hidden Brooklyn accent confirmed Wang's theory. There were very few Adams in Brooklyn. Oh, this guy's got a Brooklyn accent, so he's like Super Mario. Like the old Super Mario. Like Captain Lou Albano. No Wang rap. Let's restart the music again. I have a job for you. Wang said nothing, but at least now this man who called himself Adams had gotten his attention. I need you to recover a stolen device, and if you can, the inventor of a device, a Dr. Morgan.
Why is device important?
Wang asked.
And to who is device important?
Adams smiled at Wang. Wang felt immediately as if he needed a shower. The device, called the ABCD device, could destroy the world, Adams said. It was developed in a government lab in Colorado to help stop earthquakes. That's about all I know. Wang said nothing. Adams was very good at what he did. Wang could tell he was telling mostly the truth, but with the plain face of Adams, Wang could not tell which parts were truth and which were not.
Price?
Wang said. Adams again smiled, and now Wang knew for certain he'd have to take a shower. It was as if the man's smile sprayed grease over everything with its smarmy range. A very high price, Adams said. It has come to my attention that you are looking for the first name of a man named Tanaka. Wang instantly had Adams pinned against the wall 2 feet off the ground, holding him there with one hand under his neck.
Name or die,
Wang said. Adams made a slight choking sound that indicated he was trying to talk. Wang released the pressure of one finger and eased his thumb slightly to the right, letting the man breathe, but still holding him up by the neck. I don't know the name, Adams managed to say, his voice sounding like a cartoon character's. Wang knew he was telling the truth. No man lied while hanging by his throat, his neck ready to snap.
Then how can name be payment?
My boss knows the name, Adams said. He said if he told me, you would kill me for the information instead of finding the missing device.
Your boss knows me well.
Wang said, dropping Adams to the floor and turning away. Who is boss? I don't know that either, Adams managed to say, as he sat on the floor of the hallway, rubbing his neck. You only paid me to find you. Wang knew that was also the truth. Will you take the job? Adams asked. If Wang finds stolen property and not get name. Adams held up his hand. I know, you'll kill me. And sister and mother and dog, Wang said. And boss's sister, boss's mother, and boss's dog. Adams nodded and said nothing. Wang had turned around and stared down at the man in the hall. Where's the vice located? Adams snorted and continued to rub his neck. If we knew that, would I be hiring you? Possibly, Wang said. Adams shook his head. We only know the trail vanished in France. Adams began to reach inside his coat pocket, but Wang cleared his throat, stopping Adams in motion. Careful, Wang said. Wrong move. Quick death. Adams nodded, swallowing. Just a plane ticket, he said, easing the paper out of his jacket pocket and holding it out for Wang to take. Wang took it and glanced at the paper. Paris, France. A place where women like sex with men who smelled bad. A very odd place. I go, Wang said, slipping the ticket inside his shirt. Plane leave in 2 hours. Must prepare. Wait here. He turned and went back inside, closing the door on the red face of Jefferson Adams. On the way to the airport, Adams told Wang the rest of what he needed to know about the ABCD device and Dr. Morgan, and then Wang made him pay for the cab. And that's chapter 2. We are only 13% through the first novel. We might have to make this 2 streams if this keeps up. Oh boy. So tell me, chat, what did you think about chapter 2? Yes, this voice acting is very cringe, isn't it? Well, it happens to the best of us. I have to immerse you into the story, of course. You know, yeah, I have to do Lo Wang's voice of justice. Isn't that right, Lo Wang?
Haha, that's me.
Yeah, it does need more Wang. That was some pretty long exposition about the Spy Master. But real quick, I'm just gonna get some water. I'm just gonna move low IQ a little bit up so I can just yeah. Yeah, so when Lo Wang is big, that's when you know I'll be AFK. So give me a minute, I'm gonna get a bottle of water. You can enjoy background music.
I'm back.
Let me shrink my wang. How many chapters are there? I forget, actually. But I'm gonna go back to chapter 3 in a bit. A lot, as you can see. I think there's like 20. So yeah, I'm gonna have to split this into 2 streams at this rate. I think there's more than 20. Okay, yeah, there's just 20. Yeah, 20, excuse me. I don't know why I scrolled. I could have just done that. Okay, so let's continue with chapter 3. Excerpt from The Day the Continents Moved by Dr. K.D. Morgan. Earthquakes along continental plate lines caused the most damage and took the most lives. The west coast of the United States was hit hard, but over 1,000 of the deaths in Los Angeles were self-inflicted when the members of the cult called the Big One all rushed to the tar pits, stripped down to beanie propeller caps and Nike tennis shoes, and dove in. Scientists have promised that when they reopen the La Brea Museum, they will put one cult member's body on display, beanie, shoes, and all, right next to the mastodon skeleton. A long distance away from where Jefferson Adams had just finished talking to Lo Wang, Dr. K.D. Morgan, blindfolded with wide black tape, was shoved roughly into the center of a large cavern. To her, the place smelled of bugs, and the mold was warmer than Dr. Morgan liked. In fact, for most of the trip, she had been hot, sweating through her expensive lace bra, silk blouse, and white lab smock, and after 12 hours, she desperately needed to go to the bathroom. Yeah, Dr. K.D. Morgan isn't real. He's a character here. She had caught herself before she hit her head on the floor, then sat up. Under her, she could feel a smooth, hard surface, almost like polished stone. She doubted there would be a bathroom anywhere near. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her hair, yanked back her head, and then ripped off the tape that had been covering her eyes. "Shit!" she shouted at the pain, instantly pulling her hands up to her eyes to cover them from the light, and to check to see if she still had eyebrows. As a natural blonde, her eyebrows weren't a prominent feature on her face, but still, she didn't much like having them ripped out. "Welcome, Dr. Morgan," a loud, full voice said. "Welcome my ass," Dr. Morgan said. "Kidnapping me, killing my friends, and ripping out my eyebrows is not much of a welcome." "You could be dead," the voice said. Good point," she said. Slowly, she forced her eyes open against the light, which seemed so bright to her recently blindfolded eyes, and stared up at the man speaking. Like the ones who had attacked her lab, he was cloaked and his oddly shaped hands were covered by gloves. The cloak covered his face in shadow, allowing her to see none of it. She looked him up and down while he stood above her, unless she was mistaken, or he had some wild lifts on his feet. He was one of the biggest men she had ever seen. Usually she liked her men big. This big guy just repulsed her. She climbed to her feet while rubbing the area where her eyebrows had once been. There was no doubt she was going to have unsightly stubble when they started growing back. Damned annoying. "So," she said, "who exactly are you?" "You may call me Dr. Exo." Bum bum boom. Dr. Morgan snorted, unable to get a glimpse inside his hood. "More likely, I'll call you shithead." Dr. Exo half laughed. "Ha!" The sound seemed really weird coming from the dark area under the hood. More like a snake hissing than a real human laugh. I always admire a person who shows no fear, he said. I had been warned that would be the case with you. I'm sexually active in the age of age, she said. I don't know what fear is. So just what do you want from me? I don't imagine you went through all the trouble to kidnap me just to talk about my fear of men in stupid-looking hoods. At that, Doctor, you are correct, Dr. XO said. I need you to start up your new invention, your ABCD device. Then she really laughed. There was no chance she'd ever do that for him. None at all. I see you find my request humorous, he said. And I suppose that my killing your parents, your daughter, your ex-husband, and your cat Muff Diver would also seem funny? The blood inside her body seemed to turn into sludge. She could feel her heart pounding as if it worked to move the heavy liquid. Just the thought of her family all dead because of her made her head spin. And losing Muff Diver would be the worst. That cat had been with her since her undergraduate days, but she had no choice. Starting her invention might kill millions. She shook her head sadly. Why hadn't she gone into cosmetics as her mother suggested? She could have invented new base creams and new perfumes, new toenail trimmers, cool stuff that wouldn't have gotten her and her family and poor little Muff Diver killed. But no, she had to get fascinated over that earthquake that hit their town when she was 7. She just had to know what caused it, and why scientists couldn't stop them. And that she just had to go to school and study earthquakes and then invent the artificial beginnings of the continental drift device. A machine so powerful that it could stop the movements of one continental plane under another, thus stopping earthquakes. I see, Dr. XO says, by your expression, that you will now help me start your invention. Under that hood, she said, I'm surprised you can see anything. Kill anyone you like. Kill my cat for all I care. I'm not starting up my invention for you. Besides, I'm sure that the government has already sent a force to rescue me and my invention. Oh, there is one person on his way, Dr. XO said, but he will easily be taken care of. He waved a gloved hand for 2 men to come in. We'll do this a different way. Only one person sent to rescue her? She couldn't believe that. There had to be thousands. 2 hooded men stepped up behind her and grabbed her arm. Their grasps were stronger than anything she felt before, and the prick of a needle going into her arm stung like a bee. Shit, she said again, trying to turn out of their grips, without success. Usually she didn't have problems getting out of a man's hands, but these guys were really, really strong. Excuse me. Slowly, a cloud moved up over her eyes. For a moment, she felt dizzy. Then she looked up at Dr. XO with a completely different feeling. Now, instead of hating him, she was totally in love. She didn't know what she had been thinking before, refusing such a great man as Dr. XO. Of course, she would do anything he had asked. She would have his babies barefoot in the kitchen. She'd even fetch him his beers. She would start her machine. Anything, if he'd just love her in return. Now, Dr. Morgan, XO said, moving down the stand in front of her. Will you help me? Deep down inside her head, a little voice, small and weak, shouted no. But she ignored it, smiling at the hidden face in front of her. Of course, my love, she said. Anything. He reached out a small, gloved, misshapen hand and touched her shoulder. The touch was like Elvis touching a teenage fan. Ooh. She wanted to scream at the sheer joy of it. Her head felt light, her knees weak, and she almost lost control of her bladder. Almost. Well, the little voice inside her head wanted to be sick, but on the outside she sighed ecstatically. Now I want you to show me how to place and start your ABCD device, Dr. XO said. We've got some big pieces of land to move, you and me. Yes. Again, the little voice inside her head protested, but outside she smiled and said, I'd love to. Where is it? I can start any time you'd like. Dr. XO nodded. Show her to the new lab. In the bathroom, she said. And the bathroom, he said. Brilliant. Brilliant writing, by the way. Anyways, Lo Wang let Adams pay for the cab and got quickly out. The cab driver had smelled of old onions and bad sausage, and he drove like a baboon in heat. Stop, start, jerk left, jerk right, repeat. Lo Wang had considered killing the cab driver after the first mile and driving himself, but then the traffic on the bridge cleared, and the guy never got under 40 all the way to the terminal, giving Lo Wang no safe chance to end the stupidity. The lack of a traffic jam had saved the man his useless life, at least for the moment. Lo Wang was convinced another passenger would soon kill the smelly one. It would be good riddance. Without a word to Adams, Wang had left the plain-looking government man standing on the sidewalk and disappeared into the crowds inside. In 20 minutes, Wang had checked in with the airline and was moving toward his gate. The security systems of American airports were laughingly simplistic, but he had no intention of smuggling weapons past them. You can tell this was written before, you know what. He had sources in France that could supply him with all the high-velocity weapons and sticky bombs he would ever need. He could even get nuclear weapons if he wanted. I like nuclear weapons. But he liked the personal touch of smaller weapons. Nuclear weapons didn't allow him to close enough to feel the deaths. He laughed at the security gates. There was no point in going in. There was no point in going to even the slightest trouble of smuggling larger weapons through, but it would have been simpler to get a few smaller ones past. Next time, for fun. He moved with the crowd toward the international gates, studying the walk of a tall blonde woman in front of him. She wore the high heels Wang loved so much, and a tight skirt that accented her every step, a moving work of art. Not more than 20 paces inside the security's checkpoint, he noticed two men move away from luggage lockers and fall in behind him. A short 10 steps later, two others joined the group following him. They did not wear the headband of Zilla's assassins, nor did they have the eyes of killers. They seemed more like simple hired hoods, and they were following him, interfering with his enjoyment of watching the blonde walk. Annoying and puzzling. Besides Adams, someone obviously knew of his mission. Who knew was the question. He would get the question answered as soon as the tall blonde reached her gate. He studied the men following him while he followed the woman in the tight skirt. They all had the look of a guardsman dressed for a night out with his best girl. Cheap suit, unpolished shoes, and greasy hair. The woman stopped to buy a copy of Sports Illustrated, so Wang stopped beside her and pretended to study the selection at a small newsstand while swimming in the wonderfully soapy smells of her latest shower. Around the newsstand, the men fanned out. From his count, there were 8 of the annoying creatures following him. All had knives and guns hidden in their clothes. Obviously, they had a way to get weapons into an airport. "Can I help you?" she said, glancing over at him. "You seem to be following me."
Lo Wang always attracted to beauty, Wang said, smiling at her. Your walk, a thing of beauty.
"Look, mister," she said, frowning. "Stop following me, or I call the police, understand?" Without waiting for an answer, she turned and stormed down the airport concourse. Wang watched her go for a short time, enjoying the view. Then he turned and headed for the nearest men's room. "Follow me, dog meat," he said, loud enough for 2 of the hoods to hear. "If you want Wang." Yes, this character does have a lot of depth, doesn't he? He moved inside the large restroom and to the sink furthest away from the door. Only 3 travelers were there, 1 at the urinals and 2 in the stalls. None of them had the look of the hoods following him. He studied the restroom quickly. The ceiling was made of movable panels. There were 8 urinals, 6 stalls, and 8 sinks. A standard airport men's room. A good place to kill those following him and still make his plane. But he would have to be careful not to get blood on his traveling clothes. That's quite inconvenient. The first 2 hoods entered, and without looking at where he stood, moved towards the stalls. They had blank looks on their faces. Clearly neither was the leader. The leader would enter last. 2 more entered, followed by 2 more. All of them spread out as Lo Wang stood near the sink and stared at his reflection in the mirror. Finally, the last two had arrived. The large restroom now seemed crowded, with all the men standing around and pretending to do nothing. But before the leader could even nod to his men, Wang turned and faced the men. "You want a piece of Wang?" He jumped away from the sink. Almost instantly, he was between two of them. With simple strokes of his index fingers against the sides of his heads, he killed both men before they could even get their guns completely out of their coats. As they dropped, he took their guns and spun, firing with both hands at the 4 men behind him near the stalls. 4 shots, 4 deaths. Then, with a quick shot under his arm, he took out the 7th man. Then Wang turned to the leader, smiling. The guy had black hair, dark eyes, and a surprised look on his rough face. His hand was on a pistol just inside his coat jacket, but he had not yet had time to draw the gun out. Wang had killed his 7 men before he had time to pull out his own weapon. Very slow reaction time for the man. But as the ancient Japanese saying goes, "Man trying to surprise, easy to surprise." Wang moved up to the man, pointing the guns casually at him. Then, with a motion the man didn't see, Wang wiped his prints off the guns and handed the leader the 2 weapons. Both were small, poorly cleaned, and were not worth even bothering to keep. The man looked even more surprised at the 2 guns in his hands. He grasped them for a moment, most likely thinking of firing at Wang, then came to his senses and dropped them like hot coals from a campfire. When the police found them later, his fingerprints would be on them. "Who sent you?" Wang asked. The hood looked as if he was going to panic. Sweat was breaking out on his forehead and he smelled lightly of garlic, but he said nothing. Behind Wang, the regular airport traveler who had been standing at the urinal when all the fun suddenly started panic and started towards the door out of the restroom. He still had his fly open, but at least had the common decency to replace his private tool into its proper location. Or should I say, his Wang. "No," Wang said, holding a finger up at the man. The man instantly stopped, frozen in his track. "Very good," Wang said. "Better zip fly." Ancient Japanese saying, "Man who die with fly open, embarrassed for all time." Wang smiled at the man as he zipped up, then turned back to the leader of the dead man. "Answer, please?" The guy was really sweating now, and Wang had no desire to touch him to extract more information, but it seemed he had no choice. With a flick of one finger against the man's cheek, Wang gave the man a reason to talk. The guy screamed in pain and almost fell. By crushing one simple nerve, Wang had sent hot waves of pain shooting down the man's neck and into his groin, where it would slowly build up into agony. Ugh. The pain would slowly grow in the man's crotch, like ants eating away the flesh. The man was lucky he would not live long enough to really feel the full extent of the pain. "Who sent, please?" Wang said. The man nodded, gasped for breath, and said, "A guy named Frank hired us on Long Island." "Frank?" Wang said. "You knew no Frank. Who Frank work for?" The guy gasped and held his private area with both hands. He said it was some guy named Exo. Dr. Exo. That's all I know." "Look me in eye," Wang said. The guy managed to do as he was told after a shuddering breath. Wang could see the man was telling the truth. With such pain, a man with his low moral character could never hide a lie. Ancient Japanese saying, "Only moral people make good liars." With a flick of his wrist, Wang killed the man with a stroke across his neck, breaking his windpipe and shattering his vocal cords. The man dropped to his knees, one hand holding his throat, the other holding his crotch. Then his eyes went blank and he slumped over. Wang glanced around. The regular traveler was standing, watching where Wang had told him to stand. The other 2 had remained in the stalls, minding their own business, or finishing it, as the case might be. Wang walked up to the man and stared him in the eye. The guy gulped, but stood his ground and said nothing. "Two choice," Wang said. "You saw nothing, Wang smiled and then said, "Or you die." "I saw nothing," the man said. But Wang knew instantly he was lying. He would give an exact description of Wang the moment Wang left, thus causing Wang to miss his flight. And Wang did not want to miss a flight to Paris for this man. He was not worth the hassle. Wang killed him quickly and painlessly, with a sharp blow to the temple. Then Wang quickly climbed on a sink. Silently, he pushed one ceiling panel aside and climbed up into the space above the restroom. He replaced the ceiling panel and worked his way along the supports inside the ceiling for a good 100 paces among the light fixtures and heating ducts. Finally seeing the sinks of another restroom below him through the cracks in the panels, he waited until no one was in the room, then moved a panel aside and dropped it to the sink, quickly replacing the tile. A moment later, he was leaving the restroom just as the woman in a tight skirt was entering. He bowed to her, admiring the fact that she looked as good from the front as she did from behind. "What are you doing?" she asked, the anger clear in her eyes. He smiled. She was a big woman, and he loved big, angry women. "Since I here first, I not follow you." He bowed again at her puzzled expression, turned, and headed for his gate, forgetting only slightly that she hadn't been there first. But he had no time for her. If he hurried, he would have just made his plane. Behind him, he knew she was watching. He hoped she enjoyed his walk as much as he had enjoyed hers. And that's chapter 3. Interesting. And yes, this is real. This is a real novel. I know some people have not gotten over that fact yet. This is very, very real. This is a thing that indeed exists. Right, so let's continue. Unless anybody else has anything to say about the previous chapter and my crappy low Wang voice. I'm gonna reset the music again. I know, again. I'll probably switch to something else if anyone else has any suggestion for Shadow Warrior style music. H, okay. That's all I need. Okay, so chapter 4. Excerpt from The Day the Continents Moved by Dr. K.D. Morgan. Due to the nature of the continental movement, the center of North America was largely unaffected. When a reporter in Kansas City asked the farmer what he was doing to prepare for what people were calling the end of the world, the farmer replied, "I can't get my bowels to move. You don't expect me to believe someone can move the entire country, do you?" Wang settled into his seat near the front of the first-class section of the big plane. The fight in the airport bothered him. The men sent against him were nothing more than flies on the butt of a cow. Why would this Dr. Exo, the man Adams said had taken the ABCD device, send such weaklings against him, a Shadow Warrior, the greatest fighter ever? Wang pondered the question, rubbing the hair on his chin back and forth. Could it be that Dr. Exo didn't know who he was? Rub, rub. Could it be that Dr. Exo knew that only someone had been hired? Rub, rub. That bushy hair that sprouted from his chin waved back and forth like the tail of a happy dog. Such a simple explanation felt wrong to Wang. Rub, swish, rub, swish. A man smart enough to steal such a device as the ABCD device would know who his enemies were. Rub, swish, rub, swish. Unless Dr. Exo had sent the men against him so Wang would now underestimate Dr. Exo. Rub, swish. Rub, swish. Rub, swish. Rub, swish. Of course, Wang said. Ancient Japanese saying, show weakness, hold strength. Wang stopped rubbing his chin and clapped his hands together. A clever reverse plan. If the men had managed to take out Wang, Dr. Exo would be ahead, his enemy easily vanquished. If not, Dr. Exo had showed weakness to Wang, while at the same time judging Wang's strength. A smart ploy that would not fool Wang. He would, from this point forward, consider Dr. Exo an adversary of the largest proportions and the highest intellect. The flight attendant was a fake blonde who smiled at Wang when she placed a napkin beside him. "Drink before you take off?" she asked, her voice sweet, but her tone not caring, almost bored with the job. Wang stared at her chest, as of course he would, eye level in front of him. She looked to be built very well, but nothing moved right about the upper part of her body. Too firm, too big. Wang could never understand why women chose to add fake items to their bodies. False eyelashes, high heels for extra height, lipstick, eyeshadow for color when there was no color. All false. It showed to him the true nature of the woman. False appearance, false inside. The two went hand in hand like flies and shit. Not a flight attendant with high heels, lipstick, fake blonde hair, and a fake smile faced him, wanting to wait on his every need and desire, but she seemed too fake to allow near him. Wang never trusted fake people. "Those real tits?" he asked. He figured if her tits were real, then the rest of her fake items he could overlook. She could wait on him while he stared at her chest only. It took her a moment before she realized what Wang had asked. Then it seemed she still didn't believe what he had said. "Excuse me, sir?" "Those real tits?" Wang repeated, pointing at the firm mounds on her chest. She staggered back as if slapped, her face a real red all the way up to her fake blonde hair. Without another word, she turned and moved back towards the front of the plane. Wang shrugged. "Oh, must be American made," he said. "Too bad. Someday they blow up." Boom! At that moment, a tall, thin woman with long, real blonde hair dropped with a sigh into the seat beside him. She had olive skin that almost seemed greenish at the strange light of the plane. She instantly slipped off her shoes, again sighing. Wang laughed. "Haha, ancient Japanese saying," he said to her. "Woman with tight shoes, tight in other ways." She smiled and turned to face him. Wang saw instantly that she was very beautiful, like the first flower of spring on a day full of sunshine. Wang instantly wanted to climb her stems, pluck her petals, sip her nectar. He wanted to be the bee in her garden, dipping his stinger into her open flower. Oh boy. "I remember the ancient saying is Chinese," she said, her green eyes boring into him as she smiled. "Women who wear tight shoes, too tight for love." Wang laughed this time. "Haha, Japanese," he said. "I'm Japanese, I'm sure." "Wang isn't a Japanese name normally," she said, looking at him intently. Wang's first impulse was to kill her. He could have done so with a simple blow, then made it look as if she was sleeping until they reached Paris. But her beautiful green eyes stopped him like a knee to the groin. Often he thought with his small brain. At times such thinking had turned out good. Other times, like the night with the woman wrestler, it cost him. She broke 2 of his ribs before he got tired of her squeezing him with her legs every time she had an orgasm. He killed her during her 5th. She died with a smile on her face. Now, for the moment, he thought with both little and big brain. He wanted her alive to keep her beauty beside him for the long trip, but he needed to know how she knew his name. Oh, that's right, she does know his name. She reached out with a beautiful empty hand for him to shake. "I'm Thorell Morgan," she said. "Dr. Morgan's daughter." "Who told you I was here?" Wang asked, not taking her hand, but instead staring into her green eyes, looking for truth. "A plain-looking government man named Jefferson Adams," she said. "I held him by the balls until he arranged a ticket on his plane for me." Wang nodded and smiled at her. She told the truth, no doubt. He could imagine exactly what she had done, and he liked her for it. He shook her hand, enjoying the warm, soft feel. Then he said, Adams, little tiny dick, right? She held up her thin little finger. Wang laughed. Ancient Japanese saying, smaller dick, greater need of power. She laughed with him, and then sang, Chinese saying, shorter man, greater need of power. The same, Wang said. She laughed again with a soft sound he couldn't describe, but one he loved. Suddenly, she got a serious expression on her face. Adams passed out before he could tell me if you had any real leads as to my mother's location. You no go along, Wang said, guessing exactly what she was driving at. It's my mother, she said. I'll go if I want. No go. Look, she said, putting her hand gently on his bare arm. It's my mother. I can help. Wang liked the feel of her hand on his skin. It was like brushing his flesh with the soft petals of a rose, and she smelled good, like fresh vegetables steamed just right, dripping in butter. One moment he wanted to kill her, the next to eat her. How can you help? He asked, letting the little brain control the conversation for a moment. She rubbed his arm and he melted even more. The little brain got bigger and stronger. This makes the small brain the big brain. I know my mother's invention, she said. I know her work, and there are only a few places her device could be set up to be really dangerous. Wang looked her directly in the eye, little brain completely in control. Leave killing to me. She stuck her lip out in a pout. You take all the fun out of secret missions. Wang laughed. Fun in both big death and little death. She rubbed the skin on his arm softly. I think we'll get along just fine. Wang settled in his seat and let himself drift with her touch on his arm. After a moment, she glanced around. Now, where's that flight attendant? I could use a drink and some water to soak my feet in. Soak feet? Wang asked. On pain? She nodded. Don't knock it if you haven't tried it. Flo, Wang said. You strange woman. Florel, she said, correcting him as she waved for the attendant. Oh, Wang said, deciding right then and there that he would never call her Florel. Stupid name. For the first time, Flo frowned at Lo Wang and stopped rubbing his arm. Wang nodded to himself, thinking for a moment with his big brain. The woman had strength. That was good. She might live through the first day. The flight attendant moved away from Flo without stopping to see what she had wanted. What's wrong with her? Flo asked. Wang shrugged. Silicone poisoning. Affect brain. Flo glanced at Wang with a puzzled expression, then back at the attendant 2 seats forward. Then she laughed, high and light, a soft and gentle sound that drifted through the first-class cabin like almost pollen floating in a gentle breeze. I think you might be right, she said. Then Flo put her hand back on Wang's arm, and he forgot all about the flight attendant's inflated ego. And I guess that's not all that's inflated. The cavern had turned hot, and Dr. Morgan had stripped off her lab coat, blouse, and pants, leaving on only her lace bra and panties. Still, she sweated, the drops running down her tan, firm skin and soaking into the lace. Deep inside her mind, Dr. Morgan knew that Dr. Exo's evil drug was slowly starting to wear off. She could feel it. When he walked into her room, her panties still got wet from more than just sweat, oh god. And her breathing still became heavy. But the voice deep inside her head was stronger now, fighting the drug more. Mistakes were made. She was still not strong enough yet to stop from working when setting up the ABCD device. But the same voice did help her go slowly. Very, very slowly. How much longer? Dr. Exo asked after 2 hours, storming up and facing her beside her device. Dr. Morgan felt her stomach jump up at the sound of his voice. She stopped work and turned to face the hooded man. She desperately wanted to run at him, rip off his robe, and make love to those wrong-looking humps and bumps. But inside her head, her little voice shouted, "Gross! Yuck! P.U. Don't be so sicko!" Still, she stepped towards him, his evil drug still controlling her body and surface mind, making her love him, making her do everything he said. "How much longer?" he demanded, stopping her with a gesture before she got to him. "I don't know, my love," she said. "This has never been field tested before." "I want it working soon," he said. He waved his arm at the device. "Now get back to work." "Yes, dear," she said. "Anything you want, dear." He snorted, spun, and moved off, his robes flowing behind him to let her get a glimpse of big, heavy boot-like shoes. She watched him go, part of her wishing she could follow him, part of her glad he was gone. She moved back over to the large phone booth-looking device and picked up a screwdriver. Then slowly she tightened the screw that didn't really need to be tightened. Her mind watched the screw go in, and part of her thoughts drifted out to the idea of making love to Dr. Exo. But deep inside, the same part of her mind was making retching sounds. Big, grab the side of the toilet and let the water splash in your face, retching sounds. Indeed. I'll take a sip real quick. Quality content indeed. Flo stroked Lo Wang's arm the entire time the plane taxied. Then she held his hand as the plane took off, gripping it tightly as if she were afraid of flying. Wang did not mind. He liked the feel of her skin a lot. There was just something special about her skin, and her body, and her lips. As the captain flipped off the seat belt sign, things suddenly changed. 3 long-haired young men wearing t-shirts and baggy shorts stumbled through the first class and up into the area where the flight attendants were working on the coming meal. "Surf's up!" one of them yelled as he pulled out a gun and pointed it at the woman with fake tits. Wang could imagine her getting shot in the chest. Silicone would flood the entire cabin. People would drown. Behind Wang and Flo, a scuffle broke out. Then a woman screamed. Wang started to get out of his seat, but Flo's hand on his arm stopped him. "Wait," she whispered. "Ancient Chinese saying, discover problem before discover answer." "Japanese saying," he said, correcting her. She said nothing. He did as she suggested and stayed in his seat. In front of them, the door to the cockpit was slammed open, and Wang could see 2 of the young men go inside and close the door behind them, leaving only one with Miss Fake Tits in the first-class galley. Very classy. A moment later, the plane did a long banking turn and headed back toward New York. "Looks like we're going to be a little late getting to Paris," Lo said. "I hope Mother can hold on." "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot said over the address system. "Please remain calm. We'll be making an unscheduled stop in California before going on to Paris. It seems we have some passengers who want to go surfing." "Dr. Exo," Wang said. This was clearly something a man like him would set up to delay Wang. Flo looked at him, very surprised. "You really think so? Could it really be because we're on this?" "You think 5 surfers have enough brains between them to hijack plane?" She looked at the pimple-faced, greasy-haired kid in the "Hey Dude" t-shirt and nodded in agreement. Wang glanced over his shoulder at the 2 surfer-looking men in the galley for the regular passengers. They held special rifles, one that looked like as if they'd been smuggled onto the plane in parts and put together. Single shot, which would be an advantage for him. As he watched, one of them moved towards the coach section in the back of the plane. So there were only 5 total. Too easy again. Why would Dr. Exo bother? "Pen and purse?" Wang asked Flo. She nodded and dug into her purse, handing him a big pen, blue, with the end chewed. "Wang," Flo said, putting her hand on his arm. "Do you think you should stop them?" "Why not?" Wang said, staring at her with a puzzled look on his face. "Wang take out easy." "Because," she said, "you stop the hijacking, you'll be a hero." Wang not care. Flo shook her head and went on. You don't understand. Being a hero takes time. The press will want to talk to you in New York, and the police and the FBI will want to talk to you before you leave the country. Your suggestion? Don't stop them, she said. Going to California will only take 4 hours. Plus another 2 there will get on a new plane, and then off to Paris over the pole. Wang nodded, rubbing his chin again and thinking, moving his long hair back and forth. Rub, swish, rub, swish. She had good argument. Rub, swish, rub, swish. The scheme by Dr. Exo was actually a very, very good-looking one to lay low Wang. If what she said was right, it made sense. He glanced out to the window. The plane was over the New York area, heading west in the opposite direction of Paris. Wang turned to Flo. No, stop now. Why? These suffer dudes not from California. They hold plane even when they get there. More delays. So better to stop now. Flo frowned, then nodded. Stay low, he said. No hurt your pretty skin. Thanks, she said. I will. He stepped over her into the aisle, and she slumped into her chair. One surfer guy from the front started toward him at the same time as one from the coach gallery right behind first class. Sit down, the one from the back said. Right now. Must use can, Wang said, and started right at the one in front. Stop, the kid yelled, his teeth showing. Wang could tell that he hadn't had enough dental work done when he was a kid. Poor childhood led him to hijack planes. Not a good career choice. Wang kept striding at the kid with bad teeth, watching the kid's finger on the trigger of the single-shot rifle. Just 2 steps away, the kid had finally gotten enough courage and pulled the trigger, meaning to hit Lo Wang right in the chest. But Wang was not there when the bullet had arrived at his intended target. He had jumped up and forward in a low-ceilinged cabin, diving over the top of the kid who had fired. So the bullet went down on the aisle, hitting the other surfer guy square in the chest, sending him flipping over backward with a surprised look in his face. One down, killed by his own friend. Shit! The kid yelled as he whirled around, trying to reload his single-shot put-together rifle. Surfing not good this time of year in California, Wang said. You know when to go. Wang grabbed the kid by both ears and pushed, trying to get the ears to meet in the middle. The sound of the surfer's skull cracking echoed through the cabin. Wang kept pushing. The kid screamed only once, then his tongue stuck out. Wang kept pushing. One of the kid's eyeballs popped out, bounced off the counter next to Wang, and rolled down the aisle, coming to rest against the foot of an elderly lady. She took one look at it, choked, and then passed out, slumping in her seat in such a fashion as to show the world her big white panties. This is some action right here. Wang pushed a little more, making some of the kid's brains spurt out of the cracks in the kid's skull. Screams and shouts now suddenly filled the first-class cabin. One man threw up on the head of the woman in front of him, filling the space with the smell of sour milk and bad tacos. Stop, please, Flo shouted to Wang. Flo asked nicely. He stopped. He let the kid's smashed head drop. It hit the floor with a combination of thud and smack, smearing brains into the carpet. The airline would have to replace the carpet. Brains hard to wash out. Mrs. Minsky yelled at him for 2 weeks for getting brains on his pants once. The guy who had bad tacos threw out again. Wang turned around and without even knocking smashed open the door into the cockpit. With a flick, Flo's pen buried itself through one surfer's eye into what the surfer laughingly called a brain. For an instant the surfer stood there, shocked at the pen of his eye. He started to reach for it, then toppled forward, smashing the pen so far into his head that most likely it would be buried with him. With a quick backhand, Wang killed the other surfer by smashing his face flat with the back of his hand. Spurting blood covered the navigator and some of the instruments, but by keeping his hand flat, Wang managed to keep the blood off his shirt and pants. Plane now yours, Wang said, nodding to the captain as he wiped his hand off the shocked navigator. I clean up remaining scum and back. The captain only nodded, his gaze staring at the surfer with the pen in his brain. Wang spun and headed for the cheap seats where one of the more of the surfers hid. As he passed Flo, he smiled at her, and she smiled back. For surfers, Wang said to Flo, it is a good day to die. Japanese saying? She asked. American, Wang said. At the coach galley, Wang had stopped and picked up a tray covered with plastic wrapped food. How could anyone eat coach airline food was beyond his knowledge. He should just force the surfer in the back to eat a meal. That would kill him quickly enough. What's the deal with airline food? Still, no point making food critic statements now. Better to end this quickly. But Wang needed information from this last surfer, and the information wasn't a tide chart to track big waves. Wang dumped the food off the plastic tray and headed toward the back. Stop right there, the surfer yelled, standing and aiming his rifle at Wang. All the passengers in the back section of the plane were suddenly silent. The smart ones ducked down in their seats. The stupid ones turned to watch, not really understanding the true impact that a single bullet could have on their tiny little human brains. Right? Wang said nothing to any of them. His focus was on the man with the rifle. If a stupid passenger got killed, it was not his problem. Stop now, the surfer said. Or I fire. Shoot now, Wang said. The surfer did exactly as Wang ordered. Wang instantly ducked slightly to one side while holding the food tray up with one hand. The bullet hit the tray at an angle, exactly as Wang had planned, bouncing off with a smacking sound. The deflected bullet hit a man with a balding head square in the forehead as he watched head over the top of his chair. Wang shrugged. One less stupid human to deal with. Oh, what a misanthrope. The man's fat wife, who barely fit in the chair beside him, let out a scream. The balding man slumped back into his chair where he should have been hiding. Blood was flowing very slowly from the hole in his forehead and from both ears. The bullet must have scrambled his brain. Wang knew that in a moment the man's heart would get the message that the brain was dead and start pumping. Then even the smallest trickle of blood would stop. There was very little blood flowing to the brain, and clearly even less to a brain stupid enough to put its head up in a gun battle, or stupid enough to stay married to a very, very fat wife. Indeed. The surfer, like his friend in the first class, did his best to reload the rifle as Wang took the last few steps toward him. Problem with single shot, Wang said. Must hit target with first shot. The surfer's hands were fumbling quickly. Well, not nearly quickly enough. Wang took the tray in his hand and with a quick snap smashed it against the surfer's nose. Blood covered two women to the surfer's right. The surfer dropped the useless gun. Wang took the young man's hand and twisted the young man's little finger in just such a way as to cause the surfer extreme pain and never allow him to type with that finger again. Who sent you? The surfer was stupid enough to shake his head no. Wang snapped off the little finger, ripping the skin up the back of the surfer's hand. Then Wang held the finger up in front of the surfer's bleeding face. Oh, look, Wang said. You come apart. The surfer screamed and held his bleeding hand against his t-shirt. 1 down, 9 left, Wang said, and turned and handed the little finger to the good-looking brunette to his right. She took it, holding it between her 2 fingernails for a moment before she fainted. Who sent you? Wang said. Not repeat question again. The surfer was still too stupid for words. Wang grabbed the young man's other hand and twisted his little finger. Frank, the surfer yelled. Frank from Long Island? Wang asked. The surfer nodded real quick. Who Frank work for? A Dr. Exo dude, the surfer said. Figure, Wang said. With a quick twist, he ripped off the surfer's other little finger, holding it up for the previous owner to see. Now you match. A woman beside Wang screamed. Wang smiled at her and handed her the finger. Keep good luck. She dropped the finger on the floor and managed to get her feet and legs up into her chair, as if the finger might start crawling up her leg like one in a bad horror movie. The surfer held both his hands against his now bloody t-shirt. Wang looked at him. Killing him would most likely get blood on Wang's shirt, and there seemed no point now. Turn around, Wang said, pointing towards the back of the plane. Don't kill me, the surfer begged. You tried to kill me, Wang said. The surfer sobbed, blood dripping out in all directions, splattering on the nearby passengers. No honor in killing weak, Wang said. Now turn around before it change mind. The surfer did as he told, staggering toward the back of the plane. A blue-eyed flight attendant watched him come and managed, even in the tight area, to get out of the way. Wang opened the laboratory door. Get in, he said to the surfer. The guy did as he told, or as he was told. Excuse me for a second. Of course. Wang closed the door on him, then motioned for the flight attendant to come closer. Need to block closed until police open. The flight attendant nodded. I go buckle up now, Wang said, for landing. The flight attendant nodded. Wang like woman who speak little, he said, patting her cheek. He then turned and moved back towards the murmuring soft talk of the coach section and back into the first class where the flight attendant with the American-made tits had covered two surfer bodies with blankets. He bent down, wiped the last of the blood off his hands, then slipped back over to Flo into his window seat. Too easy, he said. Dr. Exo again? She asked. He nodded. Too easy. You must think Wang fool, or playing very strange game. Or just trying to delay you. Maybe, Wang said. Too easy. The captain came over to the speaker, telling the passengers they would be back on the ground in fewer than 3 minutes. Now comes the fun part, Flo said. What that? Wang asked. Getting through all the police and all the questions. Easy, Wang said. We hide. Get on next plane. She laughed. I hope you're right. She touched his arm again, and he felt a tingle run up his spine like a small ant up the side of an ice cream cone. Wang right, he said. We get next plane. Only 15 more chapters to go after this one. What did you guys think about chapter 4? What should be your assignment for chapter 4? Tell me the impact of Lo Wang's effects on the airplane or the travel industry by means of air. No, my nose isn't starting to bleed, but I do get sniffles sometimes. This story is just very interesting, I have to say. Yeah, I know this is here. Or is here. But who could miss such a event like this? Yeah, rub swish, the beard stroking part is probably one of my favorites too. I apologize if I stammer a bit, and that can get in the way of me reading it, I suppose, but, them's the breaks. But I do like Lo Wang's character in this novel. It is very accurate, I'd say, to his portrayal in the video game. Yeah, smashing a kid's head. It was a surfer kid. This last chapter left my mind blank, my heart heavy, and my pants full, said someone in chat. Oh yeah, he did do more for security measures. I would like to have a Lo Wang on a plane. If you know what I mean. Yeah, alright, so I'm gonna take a sip and then we can do chapter 4. Or 5, excuse me. Can you believe we're almost 2 hours into the stream and we're only on chapter 5? like I said, I'll have to do a part 2 to this at some point, because I forgot how... I didn't realize how long these chapters were. Of course, I could always have a text-to-speech thing read it.
Chapter 5. Excerpt from The Day the Continent's Movedby Dr. K.D. Morgan. When the North American continent first started moving across the Atlantic toward Europe, a 5-foot-high wave of water flooded over Florida. Thousands were killed along the Atlantic side of the state, almost entirely elderly women in bingo parlors who refused to leave their boards in the middle of a game. The plane. Chapter 5.
Oh.
Excerpt.
THT. Okay. Thank you, text-to-speech. The plane didn't pull up to a gate, but instead was directed to an area near the terminal. Wang stayed beside Flo as they were ushered off the plane with the rest of the passengers into a waiting area, sealed off from the rest of the airport by police. Wang watched as most of the passengers took seats, talking among themselves. Near one wall, the fat woman with the dead husband sobbed. Beside the door, the man who threw up was talking loudly to a detective-looking man, most likely from the FBI. He had a plain governmental look about him and was nodding at what the man who threw up was saying. Most likely the man was complaining about Wang when he should have been contemplating his own courage and his bad choice of tacos for lunch. Two of the flight attendants talked to another FBI guy near the door. All the rest of the police and FBI were either guarding the passengers on the plane, staring at the bodies of the surfers. Excuse me. Most of the passengers kept their distance from Wang and Flo, which was just fine with Wang. So far, no police had approached him. He knew that was coming soon, and maybe even sooner, thanks to taco breath and a plain-faced FBI guy. Wang glanced around and then turned to Flo. "Must move fast," he said. "Go into restroom, then into last stall against far wall. Wait there for me." She nodded and headed toward the door labeled Women. Wang stepped into the men's room. It was very similar to the one he killed the men in near the gate. He had been counting on that. American architects have very little imagination when it comes to making different bathrooms in the same building. He waited near the far urinal until the men were either in the stalls or washing their hands, and then quickly and silently went up through the movable ceiling panels and into the ceiling. He replaced the panel without anyone seeing him, then moved through the ceiling area silently until he was over the women's restroom. He moved aside the panel slightly so that he could see down into the stall where Flo was supposed to be waiting. He hoped he had the right one. He did. Flo sat on the toilet, with all of her clothes still on, looking up at him. "Normally," she said, "I'd not let the man stare at me in this position." "Normally," Wang said, "I not just stare." He pushed the panel open a little more and peeked slightly toward the stall beside hers, almost afraid of what he might see. No one was in there. "Anyone else in room?" he whispered. Flo stood, opened the door, and glanced around. Then she bent down and looked under the line of stalls. "No," she said. "Come." Quickly, she stepped up on the back of the toilet and reached for his offered hand. He quickly and easily pulled her tall, thin, beautiful body into the ceiling, then replaced the ceiling panel just as the door to the bathroom opened. "First time I ever sneaked out of a restroom," Flo said, whispering. "You miss all the fun," Wang whispered back. He indicated that she should come with him toward the front of the airport. Wang figured their only hope of catching a plane to France now was to go to a different airport. Luckily, they were in New York. Airports were everywhere. The best choice, Wang figured, was Newark. Only a 40-minute cab ride away. "Careful with step," he whispered to Flo as a woman below slammed the door into his stall. He pointed at the narrow walkways, then at the ceiling panels. "Fall through panels, right on peeing woman." Flo nodded and said nothing, staring intently at where she was stepping. Wang figured the idea of falling on a peeing woman must have been too much for her to even answer him. Slowly but silently, they worked their way through the ducts and pipes of the area between the ceiling and the roof. 10 minutes later, they dropped into a restroom near the front of the airport. They were in a cab 30 seconds later. The cab driver drove like a baboon in heat. It's the second time they said something like that. But Lo Wang let him live, mostly because Flo kept touching his arm with her hand, forcing his little brain to take over from his big brain. And every time the cab driver jerked right, Flo fell against him. The little brain had no desire to kill the man who helped the beautiful woman touch Wang. Second baboon driving cab driver of the day who got lucky and lived. Meanwhile, Dr. Morgan wiped the sweat off her forehead. Both her bra and panties were dripping wet, and the dirt stuck to her, becoming a red sort of mud. Why the stupid cave had to be so hot was beyond her. Usually caves were cool with set temperatures around 70. The cave was either a great distance underground or very close to the surface in a hot area of the world. Or more likely Dr. Exo just liked it hot. She glanced around. Dr. Exo sat in a large chair in a raised area of the lab, watching as she worked. Beside him stood two hooded men, never saying a word. At least she thought they were men. In this creepy place, there was no telling what lurked under those robes and hoods. And that went double for Dr. Exo. He still kept on his hood and heavy robe, even though he had to be cooking in there like a turkey in an oven. The interjection that Dr. Exo had given her was still flowing through her blood, keeping her in love with him, but after 3 hours it was weaker. Much weaker. Shortly, if she could manage it, she would be able to have enough control over her body and conscious mind to make adjustments to the ABCD device so that it would never, ever work again. But for the moment, she was still doing the final adjustments to make the device work, just as Dr. Exo, the love of her life, had ordered. Suddenly, Dr. Exo tossed his drinking glass against the stone wall and stood. "Time to start the machine," he said, stepping off the platform and coming toward her. Part of her mind was happy he was getting closer, but underneath, the same part of her screamed, "No!" He strode up to the phone booth side of the device and grabbed the red arm that extended out like a hand. "Pull here, right?" "That's right," Dr. Morgan found herself saying in her sweetest schoolgirl-like voice. "Everything is hooked up, functioning, and ready to go. The connections have been sunk into the bedrock. You pull that arm and all continental plate movements should stop. No more earthquakes." Dr. Exo nodded and studied the computer screen on the face of the device. "And if I punch these keys right here?" He pointed with a bony finger at the R key, then the control key. "It will reverse the machine's effects," Dr. Morgan said, smiling at him, while the little deep voice inside screamed. The little voice deep inside screamed. Yes, this is not fanfiction, by the way, this is official. "How did you know?" Dr. Morgan asked. "Oh," Dr. Exo said, laughing with the sound of bones banging together. "Ha ha 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 ha! I've done my homework." He punched the two keys, then reached out for the big red handle. "No," she managed to say. "It will start the continents moving toward each other." "I know," Dr. Exo said, his voice hollow from under his hood. "That's exactly what I want." With a flourish and evil-sounding laugh, he yanked on the red handle, pulling it down as if he were pulling for a jackpot on a slot machine. No low-wing rap. Or low-wing rap. Yeah, this is kind of getting to me. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the floor of the cavern shook and rumbled. Then after a few seconds, it stopped. Dr. Exo glanced around at the fine dust drifting down from the ceiling and smiled. "It seems we have liftoff." Dr. Morgan had a tear in one eye. It was all the reaction she could manage against his drug. But inside, she was sobbing. When they arrived at the Newark airport, Flo convinced Wang that they would be better off taking a flight to London and then catching another flight from London to Paris. Less chance of getting caught if they didn't take a flight straight to Paris. Wang had agreed. Then, standing at the airline counter, she had produced a credit card with the name Jefferson Adams on it to pay for the first-class tickets. Wang had been impressed and said so. Flo had only shrugged and said, "He had no choice. I had him by the balls." "Men always have choice," Wang had said. but just don't think so in that position. 65 minutes after getting off the Paris plane at one airport, they were back sitting in first class on a plane soon to be headed for London. Again, while they taxied, Flo touched his arm. Again, while they waited to take off, Flo held his hand. Again, Wang loved every second of it. Right up to the moment sitting on the end of the runway, when the runway started to move under the plane. Before the plane started to move on the runway. "Oh no," Flo said. "We're too late." "Earthquake!" someone screamed. "ABCD device?" Wang asked Flo. "I think so," Flo said. "There hasn't been this major an earthquake in the New York area in hundreds and hundreds of years. So most likely it is, which means the entire continent is moving and we're going to be underwater here shortly." "Understand," he said. Other people on the crowded plane began to shout and scream. Shouting made no sense to Wang, but when Americans got suddenly stressed, they always shouted, even though normally no other American ever listened. Wang sprang to his feet and stepped over Flo. With a few quick strides, he was inside the rocking and rumbling cockpit. All three men inside had panic expressions on their faces as the plane took off. "Take off," Wang ordered, bracing himself with one hand on the control panel. "Quickly!" "We're having an earthquake," the co-pilot shouted. Wang shook his head. There was no ancient Japanese saying, "Man who shout obvious should not be allowed to live." But Wang wished there were. Right at that moment, he'd have killed that guy without a thought. Wang stepped up to the co-pilot, and with a simple movement against his neck, the man had the man screaming in pain, rather than him shouting. Then Wang turned to the pilot. "Take plane off ground, or man dies." The pilot nodded, faced forward, and started the plane's run. At first, the bumping of the runway seemed as if it were going to shake the plane into pieces. Then slowly, as they gained speed, the bumping lessened, until finally the nose came up and the plane left the rocking, shaking ground for the much, much smoother ride of the air. Wang let go of the co-pilot's neck, and the man stopped screaming like a toy someone had shut off. "You live," Wang said, patting the man on the head as he would a child. "Now we all live." "What do you mean?" the navigator asked. "We stay on ground?" Wang said. "Plane full of fuel explode like balloon against cactus." The pilot nodded. "All it would take is the landing gear failing against the stress." "Or if not explode," Wang said. "We drown when wall of water come in from ocean." "We're better off in the air," the pilot said, nodding. "That hurt," the co-pilot said, holding his neck. The pilot banked the plane around, staring at the balls of flames coming from burning airplanes on the ground. "Thank you," the navigator said to Wang, after staring open-mouthed at the destruction they had just managed to escape. "Thank pilot," Wang said. "You do fine takeoff." "What's happening?" the pilot asked, staring out at the destruction below. "End of world coming," Wang said. "We now witness it from London." The pilot nodded. "Better there than here," the navigator said. Okay, so that one was a short chapter, I think. But, yeah, we are now 2 hours in. How long is this chapter? Yeah, that's a bit of a sizable one. Let's get the Texas Speaks to read this one again.
Chapter 6. Excerpt from The Day the Continent's MOVEDBY Dr. K.D. Morgan. Most of the big buildings in New York City were solidly attached to bedrock and rode out the sharp, first earthquakes just fine. However, shortly after the first quake, huge waves poured over the sea walls, flooding the streets of the city and filling the subways and drainage systems with water. Thousands died in the subways, but millions more managed to climb up at least 2 floors in the taller buildings to get above the water. It was as if New York City had suddenly become Venice. The only problem was that none of the cabs floated. It is estimated that only 10 of the over 8,000 cab drivers in New York City survived. Flow, swamps and forests.
Thank you, Texas Peachbot. My voice is starting to get slightly hoarse from this. So I need the breaks. Flo had fallen asleep against his shoulder an hour into the flight. Wang hadn't minded at first, but now, if only just a short time until landing, he needed to get up and move around a little. As Master Shoji used to say, prepare for the coming battle with stretching. Unless you have no time to prepare, then just fight. He had time. He eased Flo's head away from his shoulder, enjoying the feel of her skin against his hand. "What's wrong?" she asked, opening her eyes as a plant would open its petals to the sun. "I am sitting here, getting stiff." She smiled at him, stroking his arm, melting him like a butter over hot corn. "After this is over, I could help you with that problem." He laughed. "I'd take you up on that." "Way up, I hope," she said. He stood and, with another laugh, pretended to limp into the cockpit. Behind him, her lap floated over the first-class cabin like a soft summer breeze over a front porch. For the last few hours, the pilot had come on with announcements about the condition of the areas of the world. It seemed that Europe was the least affected. The American continents, however, were taking up pounding. They were headed for Europe at an undetermined speed. Australia was moving up into the Indian Ocean area, and Africa was smashing into the Mediterranean down into the size of a river. Britain had already closed the channel and was now touching the shores of France. It seemed that the world was in the process of reverting to a time when there was only one big continent. A time when the dinosaurs roamed the swamps and forests. Wang closed the cockpit door behind him. The navigator smiled at him, but the co-pilot only frowned and rubbed his neck where Wang had pinched him. "Can we land?" The pilot nodded, glancing around. 2 runways at Heathrow are open, and things in Britain have settled down. We should be on the ground within the hour. But we're going to make this one cold. No flight controllers left. Last one bailed out about 20 minutes ago. "Can you land planes safely?" Wang asked. The pilot nodded. "Nothing really different. We just don't have to wait for instructions as to where to turn, and we have to keep an eye out for what traffic there might be in the air." "Good luck," Lo Wang said and turned to leave. "My neck still hurts," the co-pilot said before Wang could open the door. "I should have you arrested." Wang laughed and stared at the co-pilot. "Ha ha ha, I should have killed you. Maybe still will." Both the pilot and the navigator laughed at the shocked expression on the co-pilot's face, an expression of fear. After a moment, the co-pilot said in a choking half voice, "Just joking." "I wasn't," Wang said, and then turned and left the cockpit, shaking his head at the sad state of modern man. Sometimes even smart men like the co-pilot had no brains. Maybe Dr. Exo was doing the world a favor by bringing all the land masses together, killing millions, causing floods and fires and eventual famine. That maybe only the smart would survive. Maybe Dr. Exo was Mother Nature's way of cleaning house, or as they say in Texas, thinning the herd. Oh boy. How much of this is left? Okay. Dr. Morgan slipped her white Dr. Morgan slipped her white lab coat back over her underwear. Even though the temperature hadn't cooled down in the slightest in the caverns and tunnels, she decided she didn't want to be caught without at least a smock on. After Dr. Exo had started her inventions, she had 2 of the hooded freaks escort her to a tiny cellar-like room. She had managed to grab her clothes before they pushed her away from the machine, and with her clothes she had picked up some small tools and a spare communications relay. With luck, she'd be able to uplink into a satellite. Then her position in Dr. Exo's cavern could be tracked, and the efforts or the effects of the ABCD device reversed. With luck. Huge amounts of luck. Her favorite movie was The Wizard of Oz. When her daughter was young, they used to watch it together, pretending that they were there with Dorothy. Right now, Dr. Morgan felt as if she were in the Wicked Witch's castle and the sands of time were running out. She had to find a way to escape, or maybe melt Dr. Exo. Otherwise, no one was ever going to see Kansas again, let alone California. Dr. Exo's evil formula had finally worn completely out of her system, and she hated a man with both her subconscious and her conscious minds. That felt much better to her, less split, and soon she'd pay him back for screwing around with her brain and emotions. No man made her love him and got away with it. No man, especially not a freak like Dr. Exo. She worked intently for 20 minutes, fine-tuning the transmission relay, hooking it into a small battery power source in her watch, tapping like in a signal. Nothing. Something was wrong. It should be working, but she was clearly not getting through to a satellite. She checked the relay again, then tested her watch battery. Both were fine. She tried again with the same results. Nothing. She paced back and forth, pacing, thinking. It should work, but it didn't. Frustrated, she pounded her hand against the stone wall. The pain solved her problem. She was underground. She had forgotten. She couldn't get a signal through the rock above her. She had to get out of the cave. But first, she had to get out of the cell. She stuck the tiny transmission relay in her bra under her right nipple. It pinched, but didn't show too badly. Her right boob was a smaller one, so the relay neatly balanced her. Okay. She put the battery back in her watch, then the small tools down the back of her panties and the crack of her ass. With her lab coat over all that, even if she was caught, they might not find the relay or the tools. She took a deep breath and banged on the cell door. Nothing. She banged again, over and over, until finally a hooded figure opened the door. "What do you need?" the man asked, his voice a raspy whisper coming out from under the hood. "Women's room?" she said. The hooded one said nothing. "Bathroom," she said. "You know, bodily functions." Nothing. "Toilet. Can. John. Facility. A man about a horse." Still, the creature didn't move or say the word. "Look," she said, "I'm going to smell up this cell really bad unless you lead me to a toilet." That seemed to get through to him. He nodded and motioned to his right. Then he stood back so she could leave the cell. "Thank heavens," she said. It seemed breaths of smell were bad in an underground tunnel. Indeed. He took her down the two long empty corridors. There were dozens and dozens of other corridors leading off in all directions. Wherever this place was, it was an ant farm of tunnels and caverns. Finally, her guide stopped and pointed to her room with a bright red triangle on it. She nodded her thanks and went in. Her guide started to follow her, but she turned around and held out her hand. "Give a lady some privacy, please?" He stopped, and she closed the door in his face. The bathroom was no bigger than her cell had been. It had a sink, a toilet, toilet paper, and a roll of paper towels. Nothing more, not even a mirror. She quickly used the toilet, might as well, since there was no telling when she'd get the chance again. Then when she flushed, she took the lid off the back of the tank. It was heavy, like all toilet lids. She held it with both hands, flat side out like a bat. It might just work. She moved to the door and stood to one side, holding the heavy lid above her shoulder. "Help!" she shouted. Nothing. "Does this guy have a brain?" she muttered to herself. Then louder, she shouted, "Help!" Again, nothing. Her arms were getting tired of holding up the heavy lid. "My luck," she said. "I get a mute." With her foot, she opened the door slightly, then closed it. Then opened it again, slamming it closed with a kick. Then again. Then, finally, after the fourth time, her guide pushed the door open. She hit him square in the front of the hood with the flat side of the toilet lid. He went down as a normal man hit with a heavy toilet lid would go down, quickly and without a sound, and he didn't get up. She was tempted to look at the face under her hood, then decided against it. Just for good measure, she pounded his head again with the toilet lid, then tucked the lid under her arm and went out into the corridor, making sure the bathroom door closed behind her to hide the body. She had no idea which way to go, but to the right seemed to slant up slightly, and her cell was back to the left, so to the right it was. Like Dorothy walking the yellow brick road, she headed off down the dim corridor, toilet lid under her arm, tools in her butt crack, relay in her bra, wondering just where the Emerald City might be, if there really wasn't a wizard. Wang and Flo got off the plane and went into a not-so-surprisingly empty airport. The place echoed. Wang half expected Dr. Exo to have a dozen or so hoodlums waiting for them, but after 5 minutes of walking from the gate to the main ticketing area, he had seen no one. The boards, normally covered in names of flights and departures, all showed that all flights had been cancelled, to all locations, no exceptions. Wang studied the passengers moving in mass from the plane. Almost no one waiting for the passengers who were arriving. All the airline counters were empty. From the looks of it, their plane was about the last one. Soon the airport would look even more like a ghost airport. Wang was surprised the power was even still on. "No flight to Paris," Flo said, staring at the flight board full of cancelled flights. Wang nodded. "From what pilot said, we can walk." "I'd rather drive," she said. "I haven't soaked my feet in hours and hours, and they really feel it." "You strange woman, Flo," Wang said. "Laurel," she said. Together they headed, with the rest of the passengers from their flight, towards the front of the airport. No one even bothered to check them through at the customs. And out front, no cabs or bus moved. A few hundred people milled around looking lost. Others lined up at phone booths, most likely calling for rides that would never come. "Follow," Lo Wang said to her, and headed for the long-term parking garage. Inside the 6-story concrete structure, he walked along rows and rows of cars left by passengers, now stranded in other cities. Unless he found Dr. Exo and stopped him, the owners of all these cars would never see them again. Finally, after Flo complained twice about her feet, he stopped at a big white Cadillac convertible. The day was warm enough for a convertible, so why not? "You like?" "Green would be nicer," she said, "but it will do if we don't have to walk anymore." She moved around to the passenger door and tried it. Locked. "You know how to hotwire a car?" This one would more likely have a car alarm too. "Then cover ears," he said. With a quick jab with his hand, he tore open the fabric of the top of the car, right above the window. Then he reached inside and unlocked the door. A shrill alarm sounded. Flo covered her ears and stepped back. Wang flipped open the hood, went around front, reached inside and stopped the alarm. "Nasty sound," Flo said. "Ancient Japanese saying, those who give alarm shall be first to fight. Car can't fight. Alarm worthless." "Good point," she said. With a flick of his finger under the hood, Wang opened the locks, retracted the torn top into its hiding place in the trunk, and started the car. Flo jumped into the passenger seat and buckled her safety belt. "Now all I need is a good tub of cool water for my feet, and then I'll be fine." Wang shook his head and climbed into behind the steering wheel. 5 minutes later, they were away from the winding access roads of the airport and headed down an empty highway toward the cliffs of Dover. And what the pilot had said, the French shoreline. Okay, that was chapter 6. How long is chapter 7? I'm kinda... My throat's starting to get sore. I might have the text-to-speech bot read 3 more chapters, and we'll probably call it a stream there. We'll probably do like 4 streams of this, maybe. Because this novel is pretty damn long, all things considered. So let's have text-to-speech do it for us. It'll be funny.
Chapter 7. Excerpt from The Day the Continent's MOVEDBY Dr. K.D. Morgan.
MOVD.
Within 4 hours of the start of the Continental Movement, the English Channel ceased to exist, as the British Isles moved over against France, snuggling into the position they had broken away from millions of years before. Over 600 boats were crushed in the sudden closing of the channel. At the time no one happened to be in the tunnel under the channel. However, over 500 lives were lost as water was forced at high pressure. Chapter 7. Add in the sudden closing of the channel. At the time no one happened to be in the tunnel under the channel. However, over 500 lives were lost as water was forced at high pressure out of both ends of the tunnel, like a blast from the end of a 200-foot diameter fire hose. The landscape for 5 miles on either side of the tunnel was scoured down to a depth of 200 feet. The closer Wang and Flo got to the eastern shore of Britain, the worse the destruction got. Wang found himself weaving the car around other wrecked cars, over cracked pavement, and through fields, to get around blocked areas. At one corner a gang of hoodlum-looking young men stood in his path, clubs in hand. Likely they wanted robbery, or maybe a piece of Flo. Wang paid them no attention, knocking 2 down as he went past. The cad's right wheels ran right over one of the hoodlums. Thump. Thump. Bet that hurt, Flo said, looking back at the hoodlum's body in the road. He make mistake, Wang said. Stand in front of car. Car bigger. Car always win. I think he understands that now, Flo said. Wang kept driving, pushing the big car to go as fast as it could on the rough, earthquake-damaged roads. Every so often another quake struck, sending dust into the air and giving Wang a true driving test, keeping a speeding car on a moving road. Hard enough when the road was not moving. The only time Flo complained was when he ran down a beautiful rosebush while taking a side trip through a yard to get around a hole in the street. It was as if he'd killed a relative. She didn't talk to him for 20 minutes. Finally, 2 hours after leaving the airport, they crested over a tall hill with a sign reading viewpoint. Normally the view was of the English Channel. But today it was of a small, rough mountain range where the shoreline of Britain had crashed into the shores of France. Both shores had pushed upward. Everything was wet and covered in mud, dead fish, and seaweed. Smell like ass of dead baboon, Wang said. Never smelled one, Flo said. You not live. I'll take your word for it, Flo said, shuddering. Wang managed to get the caddy down the hillside to where the road had once wound along the shoreline. There he slid the big car into a mud bank on the slime-covered pavement and turned off the key. We walk from here, he said. My poor, aching feet, Flo said. You stay, then, Wang said. Flo only laughed as she climbed out of the car and stared up at the 200-foot-high wall of rock and mud where the day before had been the English Channel. Wang shook his head and followed. 2 long hours later they reached the other side of the new, small mountain range, setting the record for the fastest crossing of the English Channel on foot. Maybe even the first.
They did it.
Both were covered in mud and seaweed. Wang desperately wanted a shower as he stood on the remains of a French road and tried to wipe mud off his chest. Flo, on the other hand, had gotten stronger the more she became covered in mud.
She's getting
Now,
stronger.
To Wang, she looked like a curvy walking brown shit. Every inch of her beautiful skin was covered in caked mud,
No.
with only her eyes peering out of the layer on her face. Her long, blonde hair was twisted in a mass on her back, as if she wore a backpack. That was wonderful, she said, sighing as if she'd just finished great sex. Flo, Wang said, scraping mud out of his hair, you strange woman. I'm not strange at all, she said, twirling in the road without making a move to wipe off even a drop of mud. I just feel totally refreshed. Almost reborn. New energy. New outlook on life. New desires. I feel slimed, Wang said. Japanese term. Flo asked, smiling at him, her teeth the only thing white showing on her. No, Wang said. American. But old Japanese saying, avoid women who like mud. Stain sheets. She only laughed and kept spinning in the middle of the road as the mud slowly dried on her entire body. Twice Dr. Morgan had to hide in small side crevices off a rock tunnel as Dr. Exo's hooded, strange lump men came by. They never seemed to be in a hurry, so she doubted if her absence had been discovered yet. Or maybe with her device working, Dr. Exo didn't much care if she was loose or not. Either way, for her it was so far, so good. But finding her way out of the anthill he called headquarters was another matter. Sometimes a tunnel would go upward for 100 yards, turn, and then head back down. Then she'd come to an intersection with 4 or 5 other tunnels, all looking the same. She'd just pick a direction and head off, with no idea at all which was better, or worse. As far as she knew, the door she'd just passed with the bright red triangle on it was the one she'd killed the guard in. She was lost and she knew it. And on top of that, the tools in the crack of her ass were starting to chafe. She wasn't going to be able to sit down for weeks unless she got out of here soon. Very soon.
Uh-oh.
She peeked out of the hiding place. The hooded ones were gone down the corridor. She turned right and headed up the slight slope of the tunnel carved in the rock, doing her best to ignore the slight pinching of the satellite relay in her bra and the rubbing of the tools against her ass cheeks. It was as if she was being fondled by technology. And technology had forgotten to cut its fingernails. 2 miles from where the English Channel had been, Wang found a French farmhouse with a small black Volvo sitting out front. He jumped the short picket fence, and in 4 strides was banging on the door, leaving mud prints the size of his fist on the wood. Flo stood in the sun behind him, running her bare feet through the thick grass, the mud on her skin caked almost dry. Now she looked more like a patch of old lake bottom, cracked and peeling. But she still seemed to love it. Wang pounded again. Nothing. No one home, he said. He tried the door, but it was locked. Now what? Flo said. Wang knew time was wasting. Continents were closing in on one another. When America crashed into Europe, millions and millions would die. He had to hurry. Stop EXO. We borrow shower, food, and car, he said. With a quick thought back to Master Shoji's training, he brought up the secret of pounding down a door. Student, remember, kinetic energy is equal to mass times velocity squared. Wang smiled at how he first thought Master Shoji crazy when he told Wang the secret. But later Wang understood. Wang glanced at the thick front door of the French cottage. Solid. It would take velocity. He took 2 steps back, squared his shoulder, and with a quick start rammed into the door. Bang. The door smashed open, ripping the locks from the wall. Wang smiled, remembering Master Shoji's words, velocity squared. Inside, the previous owner of the home was in. But not in good shape. In fact, she was in what Americans would call a fix. An earthquake had obviously loosened a small, but very thick, beam in the ceiling of the kitchen. One end had dropped, hitting her in the back while she ate her breakfast oatmeal.
Oh no, not her
breakfast. She was trapped face down in her dish, the beam running down the back of her head and spine,
yeah.
pinning her perfectly against the large kitchen table that was shoved against the wall. She had managed to blow enough of the oatmeal away from her nose to keep from drowning, but small milk bubbles popped in front of her nose every time she took a breath. Wang and Flo both moved quickly over beside her and Wang studied her with interest. She was a trim woman, most likely in her mid-30s. Good-looking by any standard, especially in the blue nightgown that hung open. It looked to Wang, from how the oatmeal had separated and turned slightly brown, that she had been stuck for at least 2 hours. Maybe 2 hours and 8 minutes. Most likely she had a broken back and a fractured skull. She probably wouldn't live for another hour. Wang knelt down in front of her and tapped the table. Miss, we need to borrow car. As he spoke she opened her blue eyes and saw him. At first the look was fear, but as she tried to move she realized again where she was and relief flooded through her gaze. We'll get you free, Flo said. We? Wang asked, standing. No need. She died. Just need shower and food and car. Flo stared at him, her hands on her muddy hips, her right boob a small mountain of mud on her chest. She looked angry. Wang didn't much care, but since she was going to make big deal of it, he would try to rescue the woman. Pointless waste of time. Okay, he said. Flo broke into a big smile that sent dried mud flying in all directions. She rubbed Wang's arm with a muddy hand while looking at the woman under the beam. The big, strong, hero type here will get you out. The woman blinked. Okay, Wang said. Still waste of time, but now feel better about wasting time since you rubbed my arm. Stop it, Flo said. Wang only shrugged. He moved around, grabbed the beam as firmly as he could, thinking again, for the second time in 2 minutes, back to his master's teachings about the nature of the universe. Weight relative to mass and size. This beam big, thick, and very heavy.
Ooh,
it must weigh a great
thick.
deal. He took a deep breath, went deep inside to his ninja training to gain extra strength, then focused all he had to his arms and legs, and lifted. The beam groaned. Wang groaned. Beam groaned. Wang groaned. Beam groaned, then cracked. Wang won. Beam moved. 1 inch upward off woman's back and head. Flo quickly pulled the woman sideways, out of the way. Wang then dropped the heavy beam, smashing a small hole in the floor with the end. You
Let's
alright?
click the bunny button.
Flo asked the woman as she touched the back of her head. I think so, the woman said in clear English. She looked up at Wang. Thank you. American. Wang asked, ignoring her thanks. He didn't rescue her for her thanks. He wanted only food, a shower, and a car. Saving her life was worth that in trade. She started to nod, then winced. You need to lie down, Flo said, leading the woman toward the small living room and the couch there. Take shower now, Wang said. Not much time. Please be my guest, the woman said as Flo sat her down on the couch. You saved my life. 10 minutes later Wang returned to the living room. The mud was gone, his clothes washed and wrung out and back on, wet but at least not caked in mud. You shower, he said to Flo. The woman on the couch said, Florel, there's fresh clothes in the closet. Take what you need. Thank you, Flo said. She turned to Wang. Lo Wang, this is Candace Hotline from Montana. Wang bowed slightly and the woman smiled, a beautiful smile that lit up her blue eyes like lamps in the night. Flo patted Candace from Montana on the shoulder. Keep resting. Then, as Flo went past Wang, she said, I won't be long. Candace from Montana turned and slowly sat up on the couch. Again, I can't thank you enough for saving my life. Yes, you can, Wang said. Candace from Montana looked startled, her eyes going cold. Feed Wang, Wang said, rubbing his stomach. Then let borrow car to go to Paris. For a moment she continued her shocked expression, then the look in her eyes melted and she smiled, again almost lighting up the room with the light from her deep blue eyes. Of course, she said. A very small reward for what you did. Florel told me about your mission to stop the continental drift and save her mother. I understand why you wanted to leave me under the beam. Flo talked too much, Wang said, turning and heading into the kitchen. Food was now the most important thing on his mind. For some reason he was famished, most likely because he hadn't touched any of the airline food, except to get the tray to stop the hijacker. Cold chicken in the refrigerator, she said, getting slowly to her feet and moving around the couch. And potato salad. A real American picnic. You hurt much? Wang asked as she moved slowly over to the kitchen counter and leaned against it. In places I didn't know I could hurt, she said. And I've got a nasty headache. But thanks to you, I'll live. Wang took 2 pieces of chicken and a large helping of potato salad out of the refrigerator, then moved to one side of the beam and sat down at the kitchen table. He had finished eating by the time Flo came back out wearing jeans and a sweatshirt with the words Flower Power on the front. They fit, she said. Thanks. No problem, Candace from Montana said. Wang admired Flo's clean, olive skin for a moment. Wang turned to Candace from Montana. Do you have weapons? Guns? She asked, looking shocked. Wang nodded. Uzi? Riot gun? Missile launcher? She turned white and shook her head no. How about shuriken? Or sword? Again she shook her head no. Never hurt to ask, Wang said. A small earthquake shook the small house and all 3 stared at the ceiling above them.
This is for Dead Eyes Only. This is the first novel. I'm going to let it read until chapter 10. Because we're close to we're over 2.5 hours at this point, really. And I have to reset the music again before we make it to the lowering wrap. And Yeah, my throat's still sore. Let me see if I can change the bot that reads the voice. Maybe it'll pronounce the name right.
Only dust settled to the carpet. No more beams this time. Not stay here, Wang said. Too dangerous. No. Yes.
Flo said. Come with us to Paris. It's your car after all. No, Wang said. Candace from Montana looked at Flo, then at the ceiling, then back at Wang. I think I will come. I can show you the fastest ways and good detours in case the roads are blocked. Great, Flo said. Wang shook his head in disgust. His mission to save the world wasn't happening as he had planned. Now he had two women with him. He stared at them, then without a word turned and headed for the car. At least they were both beautiful. But an ancient Japanese saying was echoing through his mind, traveling with beautiful woman take twice as long as traveling with ugly woman.
Yeah, there's only like 2 default voices I have here, unfortunately.
Wasn't sure if the world had twice as long. Chapter 8. Excerpt from The Day the Continent's MOVEDBY Dr. K.D. Morgan.
I can't get over that. MOVDBY. Okay, so that was chapter 7. What do you guys think about chapter 7? Are you ready for this character to be addressed as Candace from Montana all the time? Because we can already see Candace from Montana several times in this chapter already. Like, you can't just call her Candace. It has to be Candace from Montana. Oh, goodness. Alright, I'm gonna go take a little break. And I'll be back, and the bot will read these 2 chapters for us. 8, well actually like 3. 8, 9, 10. So give me a second, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Now it's time for more Wong.
During the time the continents were moving, the Seattle Sound dried up completely, and for 6 days running the days were sunny, the first time that happened in the recorded history of the city. Coffee consumption dropped, knocking several coffee houses completely out of business, while hospitals were swamped with cases of extreme sunburn. One eco-minded group decided to organize a special Clean Up the Sound day while the water was gone. When the continents suddenly stopped and the ocean came roaring back into the Seattle Sound, over 6,000 environmentalists were killed. A memorial, with some of the trash they managed to pick up encased inside, was built near the ferry docks. The roads on the French side of the English Channel looked completely normal, even with the small earthquakes rocking the landscape every 15 minutes. Nothing at all like the destruction in Britain. And the day was turning out beautiful and hot. Even with the windows down, Wong could feel himself sweating in the sticky heat. With Candace of Montana beside him and Flo sitting in the middle of the back seat, Wong drove as fast as the Volvo would let him go, taking corners in perfectly executed four-wheel slides, passing anything that even pretended to get in his way, and once clipping an old man on a bicycle who got in his way. Candace of Montana actually applauded him when he clipped the old man and knocked him into a ditch. You know how often I've wanted to do that to those stupid old Frenchmen on bikes? How often? Wong asked, sliding the Volvo slightly off the road to pass a chicken truck. Rhetorical question, she said, laughing. Rhetorical reply, Wong said.
Yeah, you unfortunately missed me actually reading this, because well, first off, doing Lo Wang's voice all the time, for every time he talks, is hard to do.
Does Lo Wang come for you, little snake coward? Or you want to watch Wang wash Wang?
Stuff like that. And also, this is longer than I thought it would be. So, I'm gonna get up to chapter 10 with the text to speech, and we'll probably call the stream there. But maybe next time I'll be able to do the stream longer, if I'm not reading it. But anyways.
A half-mile later there was another old Frenchman on a bike ahead. Candace of Montana want Wong hit? Wong asked her, pointing ahead. No, she said. 1 a day is enough. Good, Wong said as they flashed past the old man. Sport too easy. 3 hours and 6 minutes after they left Candace of Montana's cottage, Wong slid the Volvo to a stop in front of a large villa on the outskirts of Paris, banging the side of the car into a stone wall. Oh, damn, Wong said. I'm running into walls now. Thank heavens we're here, Candace of Montana said. I've got to pee like a racehorse.
Of course they have to have Lo Wang say his lines from the game in the story. They gotta fit him in somehow, you know.
Why not pee like Candace of Montana? Wong asked. Flo shook her head. And you call me strange, Wong. The stone villa sat on top of a small rock outcropping and was surrounded by stone walls. From the road the villa looked huge, and most likely was. It was owned by Henry Elipu, a short, stocky businessman and French spy. Elipu and Wong had first met in Japan, when Wong was working for Zilla, killing other companies' people. Elipu was trying to get information from the Japanese government the easy way, by stealing it. Wong had saved Elipu from being killed by one of Zilla's government enemies, then hung the would-be killer up in a soundproof basement where Elipu could torture him for...
Okay. This is probably pronounced Lepew. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the text-to-speech bot, text-to-speech bot in all of its brilliance, is reading it as Lepew. L-E-U. Wonderful.
As long as he needed. Wong was impressed that Elipu kept the man in agony, yet alive, for 6 straight days, getting more information than Wong thought possible. When Wong asked him how he did it, Elipu just shrugged and said, it's normal in the business world. Hang out the opposition and torture them until they give in. Only the strong survive. No wonder Zilla hire ninja killer like me, Wong said. Exactly, Elipu said. It wasn't until months later, after the two had become friends, that Wong discovered that Elipu's real name was Leonard Jones, from Chicago. He'd been living and working in France for so long, and he was so good at what he did, that he sounded and acted just like a real Frenchman. But after Wong discovered his cover, Elipu dropped the phony accent when talking with Wong. After Zilla double-crossed Wong and Wong had surfaced in America, he called Elipu, who managed to get Wong in touch with some East Coast arms dealers. Because of that call to Elipu, Wang got only the best weapons and was introduced to a wonderful device called a sticky bomb. A sticky bomb was between the size of a golf ball and that of a baseball, and highly explosive. It would stick to damn near anything thanks to its protracting spikes and had time-delayed triggers. Wang seriously hoped that Elipu had an extra box or two lying around the villa. Wang had almost felt naked without them. Wow, Candace of Montana said, staring up at the stone villa as they started up the long flight of stairs in the front. Who lives here? And is he good looking? Henry Elipu, Wang said.
Elipu.
Never notice if good looking, but notice him not have tiny dick. Better and better, Candace of Montana said. Wang only shook his head. He would bet that if Candace from Montana discovered Henry Elipu was really Leonard Jones of Chicago, she wouldn't be so interested. For some reason French men attracted American women. Wang had never understood just why, exactly. At the top of the stairs Wang suddenly knew trouble waited inside. Stop, he said. In front of him the huge double doors of the villa were standing open, almost as if walking through them would be like walking into a trap. Candace of Montana didn't listen, but kept going. Wang stopped Candace of Montana with a hand against her ample chest.
Ooh,
Wait.
ample.
What is it? Flo asked, suddenly crouching. Candace of Montana simply looked down at Wang's hand on her breast and said, "Do you mind?" "Trap," Wang said, not taking his hand away from her firm breast. Under his palm her nipple hardened, but Wang had no time
Of
at the
course.
moment for response. "It's a hot day," Candace of Montana said. "Lots of people in France leave their doors open." "Not Elipu," Wang said. "He hate humidity. Entire place air conditioned like a freezer." Wang motioned for the two women to move off to one side of the door and wait. Flo grabbed Candace of Montana's arm and pulled her toward a stone wall near the side of the front porch. "Hide behind wall until I come back." Flo only nodded. Candace looked pained. "I still got to pee," she said. "Use bush," Wang said. Wang moved slowly inside, checking out every detail. The first thing he noticed was bullet holes in a fine oak panel and a picture of Elipu's mother. Elipu had said he loved his mother, so he was not likely to shoot up a picture of her.
Yeah, my throat will be alright. I just overdid the Lo Wang voice, especially for a novel.
Rug was kicked sideways. Another sign of a fight. But the clearest indication to Wang was the blood. Blood was splattered against one wall near the coat closet. Blood was still dripping down the wall. A blood trail led off to the right. "Big fight here," Wang said to himself. Wang looked around a huge front foyer for any sort of weapon. On the wall over the fireplace in the living room were two crossed swords. They looked to be from the Middle Ages. More than likely they were so old they'd break if dropped wrong. Worthless for what Wang expected he was going to face. But a sword was one of his favorite weapons. A sword was personal. When slicing through a man, you got a feeling of personal feedback. Nuclear weapons go off with a big bang, and you don't get any feeling. But those swords on the wall would not work at all. Wang turned back and studied the blood. It looked as if it came from two different people. Wang had seen Elipu fight. If someone had beaten him, it was someone Wang couldn't take for granted, like the hoodlums in the airport, or the surfers on the plane. A large table had been overturned in the dining area. A large glass chandelier had dropped to the floor and shattered. Hundreds of pointed, pencil-long glass objects littered the floor. Most were intact. They looked like strange Christmas tree bulbs. "Perfect," Wang said softly as he picked up one of the glass bulbs and touched the pointed end. Sharp. Exactly what he needed in a fight. He weighed one in his hand carefully to make sure how it would throw and where the balance points on it were. With a quick twist and flick, he threw the bulb at a painting on the wall, of Elipu's father. The bulb buried in the senior Elipu's left eye, giving the man a very strange, glassy-eyed look. "Perfect," Wang said again as he picked up a dozen more bulbs and filled his pockets. They weren't as good as sticky bombs, but they would do if needed. He moved off silently down a long, wide hall, following the path of destruction from the fight. Overturned end table. Smashed mirror. "Someone have 7 years bad luck," Wang said softly, carefully stepping over the glass while not looking into any piece of mirror. Bullet holes splayed across the wall near one bedroom. Wang stopped to listen. No sounds of anyone. He kept moving down the hall until finally he came to two large wooden doors. With a deep breath to prepare himself, he opened one door and stepped through. His friend, Henry Elipu, was stretched out on a large pool table. Around him were a dozen hooded and robed men who all turned at the same moment to look at him. "Choir practice?" Wang asked. None of them laughed. Wang couldn't see any of their faces behind the hoods. But their robes showed humps and bumps and muscles where there shouldn't be humps and bumps and muscles. "Aren't robes hot?" 4 of the robed ones left the pool table and started toward Wang. Guess not, Wang said. With a quick flick of both wrists, Wang shot 2 glass bulb arrows into the face openings in the heavy cloth hoods. 2 of the figures dropped instantly. How you like that move? The other 2 didn't.
How you like that move? Yeah, I have to do a crappy impersonation every time it does a quote.
Seemed. One stepped forward and took up a strange martial arts stance, kicking as he approached. Wang flipped another glass bulb. The man knocked it aside with the back of his hand and kept coming. Impressive, Wang said as he countered. Then he rolled to one side as the other man took up another, completely different stance and attacked. 2 others from the pool table walked slowly over and joined the fight, all using different stances and fighting styles. For the first time in Wang's memory, he found himself with only enough time to defend. No time to strike out. No time to kill. 2 more joined the fight. 6 men in robes. 6 different fighting styles, all very, very good. And very deadly. No wonder they had overpowered a good fighter like Henry Lipu. Wang moved as fast as he could, blocking, slashing, kicking. His hands were a blur. His form, that of the master shadow warrior. Slowly he pushed them back. All 6 of them. Then one on the right slipped and let his guard down for just an instant. Wang buried his hand, 2 fingers first, through the robe and into the heart. You like that move? Wang asked. The man went down without answering. 5 left. 2 more left the pool table and joined the fight. 7 left. Kill 1, add 2. This was not the way a fight was supposed to work. Wang managed to get out 1 glass bulb and bring down another robed man, but in so doing took a savage blow to the left arm. The pain shot down into Wang's chest. Now he was angry. He ducked under one hooded figure and with a savage kick sent the man into 2 of the others. Then with Wang spinning like a top, his foot completely knocked the head off another man, sending blood splattering everywhere from the top of the empty hood. Lose head over fight, Wang said as he dove for the rolling head. He came up holding it by the hair and tossed it like a ball at 2 of the fighters. Both ducked sideways to avoid the flying head, and Wang brought them down with glass bulbs flicked squarely into the hood openings. Then there was a very loud click. The remaining fighters in robes stopped, as if the click had turned them off like toys. Wang stopped and glanced at the pool table. One of the robed men still beside Lipu held a large, round silver ball. He touched it with his finger and again the click echoed through the game room. Wang's only thought was bomb. His second thought was big bomb. The remaining men in robes took off at incredible speed for the large glass doors leading from the game room to the back patio, not seeming to care at all about their dead friends. The man with the ball laid it beside Henry Lipu's head, bowed at Wang, and followed his friends. In 2 steps Wang was beside the pool table. Henry was still breathing, so Wang figured he could toss the ball after the running hooded wonders. He went to pick up the silver ball bomb. And failed. And damn near tore a muscle in his back in the failure. Holy shit.
Holy shit!
His mind had been so focused on throwing the bomb after the fleeing men in robes, it hadn't occurred to him that he couldn't pick it up. It was as if the bomb had become part of the pool table. Yet Wang had seen the man in the robe hold it up. Wang quickly checked the bowling ball-sized bomb for a switch, but found only a smooth, shiny surface. Even if the ball had been made of solid gold, Wang would have been able to pick it up. Again he tried. Even his mightiest heave didn't budge it. It just sat there on the green felt of the pool table. Holy pieces of shit, Wang said. This not within.
Holy pieces of shit. They're just they're just knocking them all out. All the low end quotes.
Rules of physics. Oh, for God's sake, Lipu said, struggling to sit up despite all his wounds. Forget your stupid physics and help me get the hell out of here. Wang glanced one more time at the silver ball, then picked up Lipu as easily as he would a child and ran for the long hallway, the Frenchman bouncing over his shoulder like a sack of flour. 2 doors down the hall, Wang heard another clear click. With a twist he turned and dove into a side guest room. Both he and Lipu tumbled across the carpet as a large explosion shook the building. Shit. Too close, Lipu said, lying on the floor and breathing hard. What was bomb? Lipu only shrugged. My question is, who were those masked monsters? Lone Ranger clones? Fighting monks? Their breath was worse than a Frenchman's, let me tell you. Dr. Exo's men, Wang said. Dr. Exo is madman moving continents. Wonderful, Lipu said. Just when I thought I could watch the end of the world in peace, you come along and get me involved. I not come along, Wang said, smiling at his old friend. Those robed men did. They must have known you were coming, Lipu said. Maybe, Wang said. Need weapons. Now that, Li Pu said, lying back on the carpet and staring at the ceiling, is something I can help with. Chapter 9. Excerpt from The Day the Continent's MOVEDBY Dr. K.D. Morgan. Religions around
That
the world
always
all
gets
claimed
me.
they knew what had
Holy
caused the
shit.
sudden movement of the continents. All claimed it was because of something their members did wrong, working the religious guild angle to bring more money into their treasuries. The only exception to this common practice was in Ireland, where the Catholics blamed the Protestants and the Protestants blamed the Catholics. More people were killed there by bombs than by damage from the continental shifts.
Of
Dr.
course,
Morgan had
this is very topical for the 90s because this was the peak of the Troubles. Over there, of course.
just about given up hope of ever finding the surface when she rounded a corner and there was light. Not just artificial light, but real sunlight, streaming in through a small tunnel in the wall at the end of the corridor. She sneaked slowly toward the tunnel of light, glancing around as she went, but no robed figure seemed to be guarding the entrance. She was alone, at least for the moment. Quickly she put her face into the tunnel and tried to look out. The hot, fresh air pouring in on her face made her almost want to shout. She hadn't felt anything so good since her last boyfriend poured warm honey on her chest. The hole was obviously used as an entrance, even though it wasn't any larger than the mouth of a washing machine. But it was big enough for her to wiggle through. That much she was sure of. And steps had been cut into the stone so that it was possible to get into the hole. Quickly she tossed the toilet lid into the hole, then climbed in, keeping her hands and arms out in front of her on the smooth stone so she could pull herself along. Only once, for an instant, did she feel as though she was stuck. But that was only a pocket on her smock caught on a small rock edge. She kicked forward and her pocket ripped, letting her free. She emerged into the brightness on a rock ledge about 60 feet above a desert and stood. The ledge was the size of a tabletop and ran to the left around a rock face. She moved along the ledge away from the hole, then sat with her back against the stone and tried to figure out where she was. Except for the huge mountain of rock she was on, there didn't seem to be another bump in the desert as far as she could see. Nothing but scrub brush and dirt and deep blue sky. A dirt road led off into the distance in a straight line until it vanished on the horizon. Behind her the red rock went up farther than she could see from her location, in most places smooth from the erosion of centuries of wind. Where she sat the wind swirled hard and biting against her face. Suddenly she noticed the brush near the far side of the big mountain of rock. It was flattened completely. All of it. The wind must be intense on that side.
Yes.
And sustained. No wind, in this kind of desert, was sustained. That much she knew. Her guess was that the continent she was on was moving at a high rate of speed. But which desert was she in? American? African? Australian? The sun was low in the sky on one side, but she had no idea if that was east or west. From the heat she would have guessed the sun was in the west. But if it was this hot early in the morning, she had to find shelter fast, or go back inside that maze of tunnels, otherwise, there would be no way she would be able to survive. She first needed to find a safe place to set up the relay, away from the tunnel entrance. She glanced back at the hole in the rock and noticed that above the hole was a shallow cave, not much more than a concave dent in the rocks, clearly ignored by the robed ones using the tunnel entrance. She stood and quickly scrambled up the side of the rock, until she was on the ledge that made up the cave. It was out of most of the wind, and if she ducked down she was fairly certain she wouldn't be seen by anyone who came out on the ledge below. And if they did she could just drop the heavy toilet lid on them. Perfect, she said to herself, but her words were ripped away by the wind. She reached inside her bra and pulled out the satellite relay, then, with relief, pulled the tools out of the crack in her ass. Quickly, using the battery on her watch for power, she had the miniature relay up and running. And this time it worked. She keyed in a signal, basically her government code. Then she set it to repeat over and over, every few seconds for as long as the battery lasted, which should be a few hours at least. If there was anyone out there, listening, waiting for her to get in touch, they would be able to easily trace her signal. And come to her rescue. And stop the ABCD device. She just hoped someone was listening. Below, in the control room of Dr. Exo's evil empire, a man in a hooded robe watched a light appear on his computer screen. He studied it for a moment, then turned to Dr. Exo. She has started the relay. About time, Dr. Exo said. You know what to do. The man in the hood nodded and turned back to his computer board. Dr. Exo watched for a moment, and then laughed, the hissing snake sound filling the cavern. Wang and Flo left Candace of Montana with Henry Li Pu in the bedroom and headed for what was left of the game room to see what clues they could find.
Dr. Exo's gonna be like a dinosaur or something, isn't he?
Candace of Montana was holding Li Pu's head in her lap, patting the small cuts on his face. Li Pu, clearly showing his good taste as far as Wang was concerned, sighed with contentment
Freaking
every time
Ellie
she
Poo
touched him,
and
never taking
Wong.
his gaze off the underside of her boobs. As Wang and Flo left the bedroom, Wang said, ancient Japanese saying, woman who marry for wealth find jewels poor bedmate. Flo laughed. Ancient Chinese saying, cheaper that man hire prostitute than marry for sex. Wang only snorted and led the way into the blasted out remains of the game room. The slate of the pool table surface had deflected most of the strange bomb's blast upward and outward. Where the patio doors had once been was now a gaping hole. There was also a huge hole in the roof directly over the pool table. But with the pool table focusing the blast from the bomb upward, the bodies of the hooded men Wang had killed were still pretty much intact. They had been smashed against the wall and were tangled together like teenage dates at a drive-in movie. Wow, Flo said, standing on the edge of the room and staring at the destruction. You were lucky to get out of here alive. Not luck, Wang said. Skill. Luck not
Skill.
exist. Another stupid Japanese saying. Flo asked. No, Wang said. American Indian. They run casinos. They know. Flo shook her head and worked her way carefully toward the back door. What exactly are we looking for? Flo asked. Anything to give clue to Mother's location. And you think these hooded guys knew? Might not know, Wang.
The author is Dean Wesley Smith, and let me look him up real quick. I need to get the right portrait for him to show you exactly who wrote this. This one in particular. There are two authors that wrote the two different novels, but Dean Wesley Smith is the one who wrote this novel, and he looks like this. He's got the the hat. So, for better or worse, we'll just imagine him. Yeah, right there.
Said. But might have clue to let Wang know. Wang moved over to the pile of bodies smashed against the wall. Blood had pooled under the pile and soaked into the brown robes, leaving weird patterned stains on the thick cloth. Slowly he pulled back the hood of one of the bodies, then stepped back in shock.
Holy pieces of cow!
What did you find? Flo asked, heading back across the room toward him. Wang reached down and yanked another hood away from the head of another of the men. Holy pieces of shit.
Holy
What?
pieces of shit!
What? Flo asked. Wang hooded another body. Then another. Flo stopped beside him, her mouth open as she stared at the bodies. The first man Wang had exposed had the face of a man cow. The second the face of a man tiger. The third the face of a man snake, the fourth the face of a man bear.
Pig.
Half human, half animal. No wonder they wore hoods and thick robes.
Oh,
Wang
so
looked
they're
around for the head he
furries.
tossed at the two in the fight. The blast had shoved it up under the remains of a
I
table.
should have known.
He reached in
Shit.
and pulled it out by the hair, holding it up to the light and turning the staring face so that he could see it. Flo gasped. An ape man. Close enough to human that Wang hadn't noticed the differences in the heat and rush of the fight. Wang tossed the head onto the pile of bodies. The robed men being part animal certainly explained why they had fought the way they had.
Coldest
and why he had
furries,
so
good
much
god.
trouble beating them.
I should have
The
known.
tiger man had fought with the tiger martial arts form. The snake man had fought with the snake form. The bear man with the bear form. Wang knew all the different types of martial arts, but switching from one to another had not occurred to him. Next fight he had with them, they would be easier to beat. Much easier. So, Flo said, standing over the bodies. Did they tell you where my mother was located? Wang shook his head. No, but they tell me how to beat them next time I fight them. Glad they were so talkative, Flo said. I'll check outside. She turned and headed back in the direction she'd started. At that moment Candace of Montana and Ellie Poo arrived arm in arm. Look what the monsters did to my beautiful game room, Ellie Poo said. Candace of Montana took a cloth and wiped his forehead. Don't get too excited, she said. You've got some bad injuries there. You need to take it slow. Wang shook his head. The woman was already mothering his friend. If she only knew how really strong and mean Ellie Poo was, Wang doubted she'd even be near him. But money and a big dick had her blinded. Ellie Poo gently disengaged himself from her and moved over beside Wang.
Big dick.
Staring at the pile of bodies he said with a laugh, ugly guys, huh? You knew they looked like this? Wang asked. I was on that table for 2 hours staring up at them, Ellie Poo said. Of course I knew. Didn't you? It was you they said they were after. Work for Zilla? Wang asked, shocked at his friend's statement that the Beastmen had mentioned him by name. I don't think so, Ellie Poo said. I know your old boss's style pretty well. And having half humans, half animals work for him just ain't it? He's more for sending in young ninja for you to slice up practice. Agree, Wang said. These must work for EXO. The guy who's doing all the land moving. Ellie Poo asked. Yes, Wang said. He already sent 2 groups to stop me. But they were worthless fighters. Well, Ellie Poo said, kicking one of the bodies hard, these guys were certainly far from worthless. Agree, Wang said. They give Wang good fight, but learn they no mess with Lo Wang. Ellie Poo laughed.
You
Yeah,
know less
that bomb
mess
really
with
showed
Lo
them,
Wang.
My friend. My god, Candace of Montana said, moving up beside Ellie Poo and staring at the bodies. She put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes got wide, and her skin turned a sickly pale. Now don't go throwing up on the bodies, Ellie Poo said, taking her and moving her back toward the hallway. At that moment Flo came back into the ruined game room. Ellie Poo motioned for her to take Candace of Montana out into the hallway. When Flo reached his side, Ellie Poo said, we'll meet you in the kitchen in a few minutes. Flo only nodded and took the very pale-looking Candace of Montana out. So where you heading next? Ellie Poo asked, walking slowly around the room surveying the damage. Don't know, Wang said. Need to find clue. Trail end here. Ellie Poo looked at Wang and laughed. You're supposed to be saving the world and you don't know where to go to do the saving.
Yeah, I don't know when this takes place, but I'm guessing it's before Wang actually kills Scylla. Or, I don't know. Because this is, before Wang fights Scylla at one point, I guess. Like, he started out in New York, although I think Lo Wang was in Japan for the actual game, and then he was in, like, California for Wanted Destruction. So, Shadow Warrior, of course, has the deepest lore when it comes to, Build Engine heroes and their locations.
That right, Wang said. Well, first, Ellie Poo said, how about some lunch before we search for the yellow brick road? And something to drink. I'm dying of thirst. Getting tortured is thirsty work. Can imagine, Wang said. After dinner you help Wang search for clue. I'll help, Ellie Poo said. And then I'll search for clues on Candace. Chapter 10. Excerpt from The Day the Continent's MOVEDBY Dr. K.D. Morgan.
Okay, this is going to be the last chapter for today. I'm thinking next Monday we'll probably finish this book, and then the Monday after that we'll start on the next one. If that sounds good for you guys. As long as nothing supernatural happens, we should be okay. So let's finish this reading off. Because we're halfway there. A little over halfway there, actually.
Because of the speed of the continents, the winds on the eastern seaboard of America reached sustained speeds of over 100 miles per hour in relation to the ground. In New York, a man was knocked off a 20-story roof when he went out after his cat. He was pinned flat against the neighboring building between the 18th and 19th floors for over 20 hours before the wind shifted slightly and he dropped to his death. The cat survived. Ellie Poo cooked them all a wonderful dinner of game hens and fresh vegetables, with Candace of Montana doing her best to help, yet mostly succeeding in rubbing her breasts on Ellie Poo's arm. Ellie Poo showed no sign of minding at all, but Flo was disgusted at the display. She also refused to eat, deciding instead to take a bath. She returned just before dessert and only moments before there was a loud pounding on the front door. Wang tilted his head and listened to the pounding, then said, Jefferson Adams. How do you know that? Flo asked. No knock, Wang said. Well, let's not take any chances that you might be wrong, Ellie Poo said. I answered a similar knock by the hooded guys. Being tortured once in one day is enough, thank you. Wang nodded. Fine. I answer. You guard my back. Ellie Poo reached in under the kitchen counter and pulled out an Uzi, checking quickly to make sure it was fully loaded. Consider your back guarded. Oh, my, Candace of Montana said. That's a big gun. Everything I have is big, Ellie Poo said, smiling at her like a kid in a candy store. Oh, my, Candace of Montana said again,
Oh my.
a faraway look in her eyes. Wang picked at his teeth while walking toward the front door, leaving the two women to stay behind Ellie Poo. Again Adams knocked, pounding even harder this time. Wang flicked open the door and smiled at the plain-looking government man. Come in. Adams walked in, started to say something, then saw Flo behind Ellie Poo, and turned white. Please, Lo Wang. Don't let her touch me. Wang smiled at Adams. Ancient Japanese saying, man not control woman. Only think he control woman. Just don't let her near me, Adams said, moving slightly so Wang was partially between him and Flo. Hi, Adams, Flo said, moving slowly up beside Wang to face the government man. How the nuts feeling? I had to soak them for 3 hours, Adams said. Just so I could walk. Sounds heavenly to me, Flo said, smiling at the man. Wish I had been there. Adams only shuddered. Ellie Poo slung the Uzi over his shoulder and walked up to Adams. So this is the guy who hired you to save the world from continental drift. He the one, Wang said. Ellie Poo walked slowly around Adams, looking long and hard at him. Don't I know you from somewhere? Adams shook his head, but Wang could see a small bead of sweat breaking out just under his nose. Ancient Japanese saying, man can lie, but body cannot. I don't think so, Adams said, then turned to Wang, ignoring Ellie Poo. I have the location of Dr. Morgan and, I presume, Dr. Exo's headquarters. You're kidding. Flo said. Adams shook his head and stepped another step away from Flo. We got a signal from a satellite relay that she managed to set up. We traced it to a cavern area in southern Italy. Not trap? Wang asked. She used her personal code, Adams said. So we don't think so. The area the signal's coming from is honeycombed with limestone caverns and hasn't moved at all in the continental shifting. It would be a logical place to set up Dr. Morgan's machine. Are you sure I don't know you? Ellie Poo asked, moving up only inches from Adams's face and staring. Now Adams was sweating from his entire forehead. Maybe I remind you of someone, Adams said, moving away so he could continue to talk to Wang. I have a plane waiting for you at the airport when you're ready, Adams said to Wang. The American continent will smash into Europe in less than 3 days. The death toll will be astronomical. The end of civilization as we know it. The continents will again form Pangaea, the ancient continent that the dinosaurs roamed. You must find Dr. Exo and stop Dr. Morgan's machine before that happens. I understand, Wang said. Ellie Poo again moved in close to Adams, staring. Adams backed away. Ellie Poo moved in. Adams backed away. Finally Ellie Poo had backed him all the way around the foyer, never getting more than a foot away from the government man's face. Adams turned and quickly handed Wang a card. Instructions on how to get to the plane at the airport. You won't have to go through security or customs. It will be waiting. With that Adams turned and fled out the still open front door, taking the steps 3 at a time all the way to his rental car on the street below. You terrified the poor man, Candace of Montana said. Why did you do that? Wang and Flo both laughed.
God.
I don't understand, Candace of Montana said. Did you really know him? Ellie Poo laughed and hugged Candace of Montana with one arm. Never seen a man before in my life. Then why did you do that to him? Wang patted his friend Ellie Poo on the back. To give Wang advantage if needed. Make Adams tell truth. And he told the truth. Candace of Montana asked. Wang shrugged. As he know truth? We'll find out when we get to Italy, won't we? Flo said.
I figured I'd add the reboot soundtrack to this too. As long as we don't play the touch, we should be fine regarding copyright, I think.
Wang nodded, then turned to Ellie Poo. Got clue I needed. Now need weapons. Ellie Poo smiled. I have just the selection for you. Flo, would you keep Candace company while I do a little business with my friend? Flo nodded. Gladly. Wang, pick out a few good weapons for me, too. Wang nodded. Anything you like best. Uzis are a favorite, she said. Missile launchers. Wang nodded. No problem at all, Ellie Poo said. You sell weapons? Candace of Montana asked, looking even more shocked than when she saw the bodies of the beast men in the game room. Only to the right side, Ellie Poo said. And those who pay, Flo said. That too, Ellie Poo said, laughing. But I've discovered they're usually on the right side. Ellie Poo's weapons room was truly a place of beauty to Wang. It was behind a special bookcase, down a long, booby-trapped flight of stairs, and through a special door that looked exactly like a basement wall. There, behind that wall, was a supermarket of high-tech weapons. Wang walked the aisles, letting his hands just rub reverently over the polished metal. It felt like an eternity since he'd had a real weapon in his hands, even though it had been only a little over a day. You want me to go along with you on this little adventure? Ellie Poo asked after a few minutes in the weapons room. Sounds like a lot is at stake. Wang shook his head. No, you good friend. Weapons enough. Stay here. Make animal noises with Candace of Montana, prepare to defend your home if the beast creatures return for their dead. I was expecting they might, Ellie Pooh said, nodding. I think I'll give them a little reception they won't soon forget. Revenge is dish best served raw, Wong said. Ancient Japanese saying.
Revenge is dish best served raw. Gotta have another one of those quotes in there, because why not?
I thought that women were best served raw, Ellie Pooh said. And revenge served cold. Whatever, Wong said, smiling at his friend. Wong picked up 2 weapons belts and put one on, letting it hug his hips like a woman's legs. Then he picked up an Uzi for himself and an Uzi for Flo. He moved down the line, slinging ammunition belts over his shoulders, sticking knives into the belt and down the back of his pants. He also stuck a knife in an ankle holster, along with a smart little barrette. He picked up a modern-looking rail gun. It worked on electromagnetics and fired a slug faster than anything else made. Expensive tastes, Ellie Pooh said. Pay if save world, Wong said. Good point, Ellie Pooh said. Otherwise it won't much matter, will it? Not worry, Wong said. I save. If anyone can, Ellie Pooh said, it's you. Wong picked up a nice little .38 for Flo and then a missile launcher for himself. The missile launcher he slung over one shoulder, the rail gun over the other. Then he turned to Ellie Pooh. Sticky bombs. You like those nasty little things, huh? Wong nodded. Boxes of them right back there against the wall. I think I got about 100 left. Wong wanted to take them all, but he grabbed 2 boxes of a dozen each and stuck the boxes under his arm. Enough. Enough to stop most countries' armies, Ellie Pooh said. Might need to do that, Wong said. Another good point, Ellie Pooh said, leading the way out of the room and back up the stairs to the kitchen. Candace of Montana stared open-mouthed at all the weapons that Wong carried, but Flo came right over to him and took the Uzi from him, along with the weapons belt. With a little adjusting she had it around her waist and the .38 tucked down inside her pants, where surprisingly it didn't show much at all after she had untucked her flower-powered t-shirt. Ellie Pooh walked up to Candace of Montana and put his arm around her while she stared at Wong and Flo. Wong and I have decided that you and I are going along to help them fight the beast men. Can you fire a machine gun, or do you just want to kill them with your bare hands? Candace of Montana's face went pure white. Then she gulped and turned to face Ellie Pooh. Aye. She didn't get another word.
Aye. Yeah, Wong is going to a Beastman convention. They're getting ready to go to a FurCon, basically. Oh well.
Out of her mouth. Her eyes rolled back up into her head and she fainted right into Ellie Pooh's arms like a rag doll. This is just how I like my women, he said, swinging her easily up into his arms and heading for the nearest bedroom. Falling all over me. We go, Wong said. Ellie Pooh stopped in the door and with a serious expression said, good luck. We return with payment, Wong said. See that you do, Ellie Pooh said, smiling. Be nice to her, Flo said, indicating the out-like-a-like Candace of Montana. I will, Ellie Pooh said. I promise. She'll be singing the French national anthem by the time you come back. Question is, Wong said, who will be saluting? Chapter 11. Excerpt from him, settling in with the Uzi across her lap.
Whoops.
That thing when she was in school.
Oh, okay. We made it to chapter 11, but I think this is a good cutoff point because we've been streaming for like 3 hours and I don't want to overdo it because the longest stream I've had was a Heretic stream in 2019 for its 25th anniversary, and there's no anniversary coming up for Shadow Warrior except for when this game. Yeah, the closest anniversary would be in September. And it wouldn't be a fancy number like the 25th or anything, because Shadow Warrior came out in 97. Late 97. Well, this was very entertaining. By the way, this book by Dean Wesley Smith is not listed on his official website. Sad. Because it's very interesting. But yeah, we are going to go to the Beastman convention next, probably next Monday. Unless you guys would really like to see it sooner. You'll just have to bother me in the comment section. I'll probably impromptu schedule something. Yeah. We're in the next stream, we're gonna finish off this novel. We're gonna go to the Beastman convention. We're gonna go to Furry convention. So, I thank all you guys for watching. It's just... Yeah, we're probably not gonna spend another, like, 3 hours watching this, and I most certainly won't be able to have the voice to read it all the time. Unfortunately, I might have the text-to-speech bot read it more for me, even though he always calls him Wong. But, yeah. It's been a very interesting read so far. And, I'm looking forward to seeing how the rest of it will go, but we'll figure that out next Monday. But, yeah, thank you guys for watching my stream. I know it wasn't the most exciting stream. Well, maybe it was, because it was definitely interesting. I'd say that. Very interesting indeed. Because we got to watch Wang wash Wang. We got to see low IQ here. It was brilliant. Okay, so thanks for stopping by. Until next Monday. Or maybe even sooner,